Elven's Lawn is the most coveted title that is given to everyone's favorite lady of Elven's high society. She must be the most beautiful woman of the entire Valentine Kingdom, being like a white linen among people. Ingrid Farnese is the title that describes her best. A special edition of the weekly Sarantine for the first week of February was on all screens. It featured Ingrid Farnese, the white doe of humanity. Everyone was curious to see if she would be the jewel on the crown of the ruling Severus family. A guy woke up and asked Bella what made her get up so early in the morning and make so much noise. Bella started to tell the guy that the sun had long since come up. The guy got out of bed, and then asked the girl that if the sun was blinding outside, maybe they should stay in bed. The girl looked at the guy who was completely naked. He looked at Bella and told her that playing elegant didn't suit her at all. Bella started to say that if she wasn't born elegant, she couldn't be now. After a while, the guy sat down to the girl on the couch. Bella began to tell him that he had already had a lot to drink, and he still didn't have enough. The guy was telling Bella about how no one has a lot of drinks during the day or at night. Afterward, the guy asked the girl when she was going to leave. Bella smiled and told the guy that it was very nice of him. The boy took the newspaper that was in Bella's hands and started to read it. He noticed that the Sarantines were still making money from scandals and gossip about high society. Suddenly, the lad noticed Ingrid Farnese. He realized that now the victim of the newspapers was the little girl of the House of Farnese. Ingrid Farnese, known to the masses as the most beautiful woman of high society. Unfortunately, when she was still 7 years old, her engagement to the heir of the House of the Marquis of Elverton was broken off. At the end of her 10th year, her second engagement, to the Prince of Eldicia, was again broken off by his sudden death. Reading all this, the boy was angry and crumpled the paper. Bella looked at the man with surprise. The guy, meanwhile, didn't understand how dare they write such a thing. He didn't understand how people were laughing to profit from the death of a member of the royal family. Suddenly, Bella started laughing and asking the guy what was going on and if he was interested in the daughter of the House of Farnese. Duke Regan Spencer began to look at Bella. He asked her what she thought. It's funny. After a while, Regan continued reading the newspaper. It said that one day the shackles of failure would fall off the young lady and she would finally join the royal family. Many people are waiting for her to be the one to become queen, and her partner would be none other than King Severus, the ruler of the Union of Nations of the Valentine Kingdom. Regan became even more angry and cursed. He didn't understand how they dared to profit from something like this. He realized that they probably had no concept of honor and conscience. Bella began to ask the guy what had gotten him so riled up that Regan himself would rebuke someone for being shameless. Meanwhile, the guy looked at the girl and asked her to shut up as she was being annoying. Bella looked at the guy and told him that she thought the news was worthwhile, and because of them, there could be a good public clamor for Ingrid Farnese to become Queen of Severus. Regan began to tell Bella not to think so highly of the girl, because once you undress a woman, she becomes just like everyone else. The carriage rushed quickly to Duke Farnese's estate. After a while, Kayla came out of the carriage and started calling for Ingrid. Inga smiled and told Kayla about how she must be tired. Kayla almost cried and told Inga that it had been forever since they had seen each other. The girl told Inga that if she hadn't gotten pregnant, she would have come sooner. And afterwards, Kayla asked Ingrid to tell her that she wasn't the last to arrive to congratulate the girl. Inga smiled and told the girl that she hadn't changed at all. The girl told Kayla that they would talk when they were inside. Kayla, meanwhile, couldn't wait and started telling Ingrid that she had a lot of questions for the girl. After a while, the girls were inside the manor. Elsa served tea to everyone. Kayla thanked the girl, and afterwards started asking Ingrid what about His Highness and the girl's brothers. Inga started to talk about them leaving them and going to the palace. Kayla was glad about that, as it meant she could appear here more often. Inga laughed and told Kayla that she was silly, since even with her father and brothers here, she was free to come whenever she wanted. After a while, Kayla started telling Inga about Queen Severus. The girl asked Ingrid if she had seen his portraits. Inga looked at Kayla and told her that he was really handsome. Kayla began to ask the girl if she had any portraits of him. Ingrid looked at the girl and told her that she didn't have any portraits of Severus. King Severus is known as the most handsome man under the age of 25. Despite the fact that he rules an entire country, he is handsome and kind. And if rumors are to be believed, he is head over heels in love with Ingrid. All told, the girl was a very lucky girl. Kayla smiled and talked about how incredible it was, since it was like the guy had stepped out of fairy tale ballads. Kayla talked to the girl about how she had been waiting for this day for a very long time. The day when all of the girl's suffering due to the tragedies of the past would remain in him. Kayla noticed that the girl was acting strangely. Kayla began to wonder why, and then she asked Ingrid if she wanted to get married. The girl closed her eyes and didn't answer anything. Kayla continued her words and talked about how everyone wanted Inga to be queen, and there may never be a better opportunity in your entire life. Suddenly, Ingrid began to tell Kayla that it wasn't like that at all. Kayla was happy about it, because it had been 2 years since then, and the girl should get married and live a happy life. Inga thanked Kayla and then realized that it had been so long since they had seen each other. So Ingrid asked Kayla to tell her about her baby. Ingrid began to say that she was very curious to know how the girl and her family had been doing all this time. Kayla started telling Inga that it was a great attempt to change the subject, and with such an angelic face, the girl almost succeeded. After a while, the girls were still sitting and chatting sweetly, and then it started to get dark. The carriage was already parked outside the manor. Inga began to ask Kayla if she was sure she wanted to stay the night. Kayla started to tell Inga that she would like to, but the baby cries when mom is away for a long time. The girl started talking about how sorry she was. After a while, Kayla hugged the girl sharply and afterward began telling Inga to make sure that the girl in no way forgot the fact that no matter who she was with, Kayla would not be happy until the girl herself was. Kayla started talking about how, in other words, she would not approve of a marriage in which Inga would be unhappy. After a while, Kayla asked Inga if she understood. Ingrid hugged the girl and thanked her. After a while, the girl left. Inga was returning to the manor. The girl realized that the others would come late today, and it was all because of the girl's obligation to the royal family of Severus. After a while, the girl entered the room and began to read the letter. This letter was from Severus. It said many compliments to the girl. Reading all this, Ingrid cried, as she did not want to be a queen. The girl talked about how she did not want to leave Valentine, and she would not be able to leave this place. There was a knife on the table with which the girl opened the letter. Suddenly, blood began to appear on the knife. Ingrid looked at her hand and noticed that it was cut. The girl fell on the bed and covered her eyes with her hand. Inga started talking about how she was tired, and she would think about everything later. The bed was stained with blood from the wound. The girl lay down and dreamed of falling into the world of dreams and never coming back. After a while, Elsa approached the girl. Inga did not understand what was happening. She saw everything cloudy and incomprehensible. The girl told herself that she was very tired and her body was very woozy. The girl asked to let her sleep. Suddenly, people started calling out to the girl and asking her if she was okay. Inga saw Esther and Elsa in front of her. Elsa was crying and asking the girl why she went to such a thing and why she did it to herself. Inga decided that they had gotten it wrong. After a while, the girl asked Elsa to help her up. Suddenly, Endit came to Inge. He had anger on his face. He started to tell everyone to get out. He was persuaded, but it didn't work and he shouted at everyone and told them to get out. Inga tried to explain everything to her brother, but he didn't want to listen to anything. Endit went up to the girl, slapped her, and asked her if she was satisfied. Ingrid said she was in pain, but her brother wouldn't listen to her. Endit asked the girl how dare he be so insolent and irresponsible. Inga tried to tell her brother that he had misunderstood everything. Endit shouted at the girl and asked her what would have happened if the girl had been found a minute later. Ingrid didn't know what she wanted to do anymore herself. After a while, the girl took her brother's palm. Inga began to tell Endit that she had no such intentions, but also the girl confessed that she did not want to go anywhere because she would be unhappy. Endit began to tell the girl that she was free to seek her happiness as soon as she fulfilled her obligations. The girl cried out in tears and told her brother that she dared not wish for happiness anymore, and all she was afraid of was to live in unhappiness. The brother did not know how to answer the girl. He began to tell Inga that with all these actions, the girl was making her whole family suffer. Ingrid apologized to her brother and talked about how she didn't want to disappoint them. Her brother told the girl that she was still very young and that King Vilhalin was older, but he was a good man. The brother sat down next to the girl. He began to tell her that he understood Inga's concern about having a queen in office, but she had borne him a son after having several daughters, and it was worth it for a girl to bear the king even one, as the whole kingdom would become hers. Inga began to ask her brother about the meaning of the decision. Endit was still angry and told the girl to be quiet. Inga started to tell her brother that all her life she has been doing what her father and brother asked her to do, but the girl doesn't want to spend the rest of her days in Severus. The girl was telling her brother something, namely that if he really cared for her, he shouldn't put the girl through all of this. Endit looked at the girl and told her that it was too late. After a while, Edwin ran into the room. He started calling his brother names and asking him if he was okay for making him do such a thing. Endit started to tell Edwin not to raise his tone, but the younger brother started yelling and talking about Inga, saying no. The brother asked Endit if there was one instance where Inga had resisted harder. The brother yelled and talked about Inga going suicidal so that her protest would be heard, since this king is an old lecher who dreams of a girl. Endith begins to tell his brother that everyone has their own plans for their marriage, and Ingrid is too young to figure out what she wants. Endit began to tell her brother that she sees more meaning in communicating with the walls. After a while, with anger, Endit slapped the boy. Endit started telling his brother to watch his tongue. Envid was shocked by his brother's action, and afterward he ran at him and began to remove the slaps. Endit began to scold his brother and ask him how he dared to raise his hand, but the younger one would not listen. After a while, a servant came into the room and told the brothers not to do it here. The brothers were arguing among themselves, and the girl didn't know what to do. Inga tried to tell them to stop, but they didn't hear her. But suddenly, the girl shouted to the brothers with all her might. Inga was in tears, asking them both to stop. Envid started telling everyone that he was leaving. He will also go and tell his mother about Inga wanting to kill herself. Envid started talking about how if the mother couldn't handle the news, all the blame would fall on Endita and the father. Leaving, Envid decided to put a lid on the girl herself as well, talking about how suicide was not the best option. And if Inga wanted to leave, she would have run away instead of crying, for tears would not help. Her brother was telling the girl that she could have run away from this house by now, but suddenly she was interrupted by Endit, who began to tell her brother to leave. After a while, he left. Night had fallen. The girl sat on the bed and realized that Edwin was right, and if the girl did not take matters into her own hands, nothing would change. The woman who was recognized as the most beautiful lady of high society, Lan Elvina, the most notorious lecher of all Elvina, the bastard son of the king. This spring, an unpredictable action will unfold that will shake the entire society of Elven, the capital of the kingdom of Valentine. In the capital of Elven, there was a private nightclub that had everything the soul desired, and the owner of the club was the king's illegitimate son, the most lecherous man in all of Elven. The name given to him at birth was Regan Spencer. Parquet was getting off the carriage. The girls were complimenting him, saying how the guy was as beautiful as ever. The guy couldn't remember if they had already met or not. 710 April, the royal ball, the wedding day of Winstead, the third prince. Regan looked at the bride and told her she was a gray mouse and his brother's tastes were terrible. Suddenly, Daniel Beyroun walked up to the guy. Daniel was telling Regan about how nice it was to be seen outside of Roman wit society. The guy was talking about how the guy here even looks like a human being. Regan looked at Daniel and talked about how he couldn't believe that he was finally invited to the royal wedding. Daniel talked to Regan about how his luck couldn't compare to his. After a while, Regan started asking Daniel if he had greeted the king. Daniel started talking about having greeted him, and then asked Regan to go greet him again, because if the guy went with him, the king would have a better opinion of him. Regan began to tell the boy that His Majesty would be pleased to see Daniel in good health. The boy began to say that he was Daniel, son of the House of Beyroun, and that he was being honored by being allowed to kneel before the king. The ruler of the kingdom of Valentine began to greet Duke Regan and Baron Daniel Beyroun. The Baron began to tell Queen Marjorie that she was more beautiful than ever, but the queen began to tell the guy to end the pleasantries. The queen began to say that news had reached her that they had been caught in the chambers of the Marquis of Villette, and from this alone, one could conclude that the boy led a life of idleness. No one knew how to react to this. About 3 months ago, Regan had an affair with the Marquis of the Villette house, who persistently seduced him. The estate's maid caught them in bed. The Marquise, however, fell into a rage and accused him of rape. For this, Regan was convicted. Therefore, the guy had to spend 4 days in a cell. Nevertheless, the Marquise managed to force her husband to drop all charges against the guy by threats, and therefore Regan was released as innocent. However, the news of his arrest had already reached the royal family. All of Regan's acquaintances were sneering at him and talking about his affair rumors. Regan started to look at the queen and told her that he was sure that the queen already knew everything. But also, the guy added and said that women were leaving him out of hatred, and everyone would be better off if the parquet was left alone. The Baron looked at Regan and realized that the girls he was married to had left him because of his actions and character. After a while, Regan approached Princess Isabella and told her that the recent scandal would hardly play into their hands, since no woman in her right mind would even consider marrying her. The princess was surprised that Regan was so frank with her, but after a while, he started telling the girl to accept his congratulations. Regan was telling the girl that if she found her happiness, he would be very happy about it. After a while, the guy told Her Highness that he would remove himself, and afterward Parquet left. Baron listened to all this, and afterward ran after Regan. Baron was surprised that the guy was like that, and he acted like that. Time passed. Everyone was having a nice conversation and minding their own business. Regan was looking at people, and for some reason he wasn't happy. Suddenly, the guy noticed the Farnese family. The guy started talking about Queen Marjorie being the younger sister of Duke Farnese. Guy noticed a maiden among them and decided that she was Ingrid Farnese, Elvina's doe. The Baron slowly approached Regan and afterward asked him if he had his eye on Ingrid Farnese. Baron praised the girl and talked about how she was very beautiful and out of his world. But Regan started telling the guy that he wasn't interested in her in any way, and he just remembered a recent article about her. Baron started talking about how they only have to dream about her. The girl was trying to find something, and Regan noticed it and didn't understand what she was trying to find with her intense gaze. The girl looked at the whole room, and then she looked at the boys. The Baron started to get mad. He thought that the girl was looking for him. The girl said nothing, and afterward they were peppled by the clatter of a glass. The groom began to thank everyone for coming to their holiday concert. The guy began to tell everyone that they would start the red rose ceremony right away, which everyone loved and waited for. The red rose ceremony is an old tradition of all Valentine Kingdom weddings. The ceremony begins with the bride placing a red rose in a pocket on the groom's chest. Inspired by the bride's bravery, the guests also begin exchanging roses. It was the perfect opportunity to express a secret sympathy. Married women give the rose to their husbands, and single women give it to the man with whom they would like to share their future. And once the rose is in the pocket, he should respond with a gentle kiss on the back of the lady's palm. Every once in a while, things end up in an interesting way. Interesting because there are women brave enough to give their rose to a strange man who catches their eye. Regan looked at it all and said he was bored. Things that wouldn't be a bore, more often than not from the category of those that go against the rules. It was enough to gather surprised looks from everyone in the ballroom. Something that shouldn't have happened. Something that wasn't supposed to happen. A scene so unexpected that it cut off all streams of thought in his head. Lon Elvina, whose destiny was to become Queen Severus, was walking towards someone, holding a red rose in her hands. The girl walked up to Regan and put the rose in his jacket pocket. Closed Club Roman Witty. Regan was approached by Adele, who started looking at the guy. The girl was telling him what she thought. The guy was still trashing what he was mired in. Regan was telling the girl to leave and stay out of his way. But the girl wasn't listening to him and asked him if he would like it if she came with a red rose. Regan asked the girl if she thought it was funny, but Adele smiled and talked about how everyone was just gossiping about the two of them and Ingrid. Adele started to ask the guy what was going on between them. The girl told the guy not to tell her about putting his dirty paws on the immaculate Lady Farnese. Inga walked up to Regan and said hello. Everyone was murmuring among themselves, but Reagan didn't understand what the hell it was all about. The girl began to tell the guy who she was engaged to and what was going on. Reagan smiled and talked about what he had heard about her exciting past. The guy started talking about the moment when the girl didn't get engaged because of the death on Princess Eldis. It was Reagan's half-brother. The girl smiled and realized that they had indeed heard of him. The guy started to ask the girl about the purpose of the girl narrating her past. The guy knew that the girl would not want to marry him. Inga started to tell the guy that he accepted her gift, so the girl hoped that Lord Reagan would think about her question. Reagan was shocked by this. He told the girl that she must be confusing him with someone else. The girl smiled and talked about how she wasn't confusing anything. Reagan started to tell the girl that if this was some kind of joke, she was taking it too far. But Inga talked about how they weren't close enough for jokes. Reagan started telling the girl about how they aren't close enough to exchange roses. The guy got close to the girl and asked her if she was out of her mind. The girl smiled and said that she was sober and she was fine. The girl began to tell the guy that she would not insist that he give an answer now, but Inga asked for a time frame to make a decision. The boy stood in wonder and didn't realize how long everyone had been there before. The queen and the king, all the people who were there, didn't understand what was going on. Raganu took out his rose from his jacket and put it through the girl's hair, saying it was a rose to the girl's face. After a while, the guy started talking about the fact that they would see each other soon, and later the guy would send a person to tell the girl the date of the meeting. The guy realized that this was a perfect rejection, and it was just impossible to put it any softer. Reagan realized that if she didn't understand this hint, she would be very stupid. After a while, Adele started asking the guy about why he wasn't telling her what was going on between them. Reagan was telling the girl to get off his back, since the guy was still angry at the mere thought of having to explain himself in front of the king. After a while, Reagan kissed Adele. After a while, the Baron came into the room and started telling Adele that if Bella saw them, she would pull out all her hair. Adele smiled and asked everyone who cared about her. And afterward, the Baron started asking the guy if word had gotten to him about what was going on with Ingrid Farnese now. Adele didn't like this. She immediately started calling out to the knight, telling him to massage her leg. The Baron started talking about how this knight was famous for being well-mannered. Baron wondered if anyone else knew what he was doing here. Reagan interrupted the guy and told him he had something to add. After a while, the Baron began to talk about the fact that it had come to light that she was being kept locked up at home. Reagan believed that there was a real commotion in the Farnese house. Everyone understood that if all the rumors spread, it would greatly affect the honor and reputation of the girl's house, as well as the royal family. Baron was very curious as to what drove this girl to such a strange act, and she didn't know who Reagan was. Reagan was drinking whiskey and talking about how if the girl had done all this without knowing who he was, then she was still more desperate than the guy could imagine. The boy understood and hoped that this madness would not find a continuation. The Baron, with surprised eyes, began to ask about whether he was hallucinating. Reagan didn't understand what the guy wanted from him. The guy got up from the couch and started looking down from the balcony. Suddenly, he saw Ingrid Farnese. Everyone couldn't understand what she was doing here. Baron wondered how the girl was able to find out about this place. Reagan was very much surprised to see Inga, who came to his club. Everyone was touching the girl, but she didn't like it. Inga started asking everyone if she could see Reagan. One of the knights pointed at Reagan, who was sitting on the couch. After a while, the guy was sitting across from Ingrid. The guy started asking the girl how she knew about this place. Ingrid started talking about how she had asked one of her brothers about it. Reagan was surprised at that, and afterward asked the girl about whether Edwin had given her permission to come here. Ingrid smiled and said that she came here without saying anything to her brother. Reagan, with a smile on her face, began to ask the girl if she knew what this place was. Reagan began to ask the girl if it would scare her that Lan's Elven title would change to Elven's courtesan tomorrow morning. The girl began to ask him about whether he really cared that much about Inga's reputation. The guy started asking the girl with surprise what she was going to pull off. The girl was saddened that the guy had such a low opinion of her and afterward talked about how Inga came because she wanted to hear the guy's response in person. Reagan smoked and talked about how he had always been known as a very lecherous person, so he would have no problem with rumors. The guy was telling Inga that he was very interested in seeing the girl involve him in some kind of shenanigans. Suddenly, Inga told the guy that she liked him. The girl started telling Reagan that she had admired him for a long time. The guy didn't understand what kind of nonsense she was talking about. Reagan took a whiskey glass and slipped some powder into it in front of Inga's eyes, and afterward told her to drink if not the words were true. Inga realized it was a shaft. Reagan smiled and said that the Valium would heighten all the girl's senses, and it worked like an aphrodisiac. Inga started asking the guy what would happen if she drank. Reagan was still smiling and talking about how he would play along with the girl as she wished. The guy started talking about how the girl seemed to be okay with stomping her reputation into the dirt, so Reagan decided to do it right now. The guy began to tell the girl that after she had played with her, he would throw the girl to the crowd that had been staring at her since Inga walked in. Reagan began to tell the girl that if she didn't drop her fantasy right now and continued to annoy the guy, Reagan would be very angry. The guy smiled and told the girl that still, he couldn't help but praise the bravery with which the girl came here and made this confession. So this gesture was a chance that the guy was giving the girl. Reagan warned the fact that if she didn't drink, it would be as early as next week before King Severus would hear about how the guy had defiled the girl. The boy thought in his head how a girl could do such a thing. Baron looked at it and realized that even for Reagan, things were going too far. Baron wanted to stand up for the girl. But suddenly, Inga reached for the glass and afterward wanted to drink it. Baron yelled and tossed the glass aside quickly at Reagan. The guy was wet. Reagan looked at Baron and asked him if he wanted him dead. The girl looked at Reagan and asked him if he was okay. Meanwhile, Baron looked at the guy and told him it was his fault. Adele was swearing and telling them it was a waste of drugs. The girl looked at the knight and told him to kick Inga out before she ruined everyone's mood completely. Inga looked at the knight and realized that she knew him. Inga started telling the knight that if he laid a finger on her, the city guards would arrest him tomorrow morning. Reagan looked at it all and didn't understand what the girl was trying to do. The guy walked over to the girl, took her hand, and told her to shut up. The Baron started calling out to Reagan and telling him not to do anything stupid, as raising a hand to the daughter of the House of Farnese was not even worth it. But the boy didn't listen to the Baron. Inga also stopped him and told him that she was all right. The Baron was very glad that Ingrid knew his name. After a while, Reagan went outside with the girl and started looking around to find the carriage. But the girl started telling him that she didn't come in the family carriage. The guy started to tell the girl to ride the carriage she came in and not to mess with his head. But the girl didn't want to listen to him and talked about how she wanted to talk to the guy. Reagan tried to walk away from the girl, but Inga asked him to listen. The guy realized he had nothing to do but listen. Time passed. Reagan and the girl were walking in the garden. The guy realized that after this conversation, Inga would leave him alone. Ingrid began to ask the guy if she could just call him Reagan, but the guy told her a firm no. The girl talked about how being friends with her would only make the guy feel better. Reagan began to realize that judging from the whole performance that the girl showed, it could be understood that she didn't want to marry King Severus. The guy asked the girl to stop talking about love and admiration. The girl realized that Reagan had exposed her. Inga started telling Reagan that he was right, and she didn't want to leave Elvin. The boy was shocked by this. He started asking her about the fact that she had arranged all this because of such stupidity. The girl looked at the guy and told him that this stupidity was very important to her. The girl looked at the guy, but Reagan was angry. The girl told him that if he took her as his wife, he would receive a very generous dowry. Inga said that she knew that the boy had his own business. The girl asked him if he needed money for his business. Reagan realized that the girl was trying to convince him of the benefits. The girl started telling the guy that eventually she would have to marry someone anyway. Inga started talking about how he would not be allowed to take as his wife a woman that the guy was dating regularly. Reagan realized that the girl was telling him about Bella. The guy started yelling and asking Inga why him and if it would be easier to take over. The girl looked at the guy and told him that she couldn't find any other options. Reagan was telling the girl to find another pathetic bastard that would agree to help her. The guy started to ask the girl if she knew that her aunt Queen Marjorie despises the guy. Reagan began to tell the girl that everything will not be so easy with the king, who also dislikes him, and the girl's unwillingness to marry King Severus will not serve as a reason for him to cancel the engagement. The girl started talking about how she could convince His Majesty herself. Reagan got angry and told the girl that he was fed up with everything. Afterward, the guy asked the girl if she wanted to hear an easier way. Reagan started talking about how King Severus didn't care about personality. The guy started talking about how all he cared about was a pretty face. Reagan started telling the girl to stab him in the face instead of the wrist next time. The girl stuttered and told the guy that it was all an accident. Reagan walked over to the bench, put a tissue on it, and showed the girl to sit on it. As soon as Inga sat down, she started talking about how she would not make it hard for the guy and would not ask him for anything else. The guy started talking about how it seems like the girl doesn't listen to what others say. Inga started talking about how Edwin once told the girl that it was their family trait. Inga started telling the guy that if he became hers, she would always be willing to lose in everything. Reagan wanted to say something else and get indignant, but the girl took the handkerchief and left, saying that she would return him next time. The boy was puzzled. He couldn't understand what the girl wanted from him because she had promised that this meeting would be the last. Inga smiled and talked about the fact that this meeting could be the last or not. Reagan wanted to say something to her, but the girl had already left. The guy started to walk back. Reagan was curious to know whether Inga would have taken drugs or not. Pablia, Reagan Spencer's mansion. Someone started knocking on the door of Jochen, Reagan's half-brother. Reagan walks in the door. Jochen started telling the guy that he was just impossible. Jochen would come back and ask the guy if he could at least get dressed, since the guy had been waiting for him for 2 hours. But Reagan would calmly look and talk about how, if he had to, Jochen would wait for him for 3 hours too. Jochen started telling the guy about how all of this stuff would take no more than 10 minutes. On Jochen's desk was a paper on Sarantine. The boy picked up the paper and suddenly saw something on it that shocked him. Farnese Manor. Reagan was sitting on a chair, and across from him was his older brother, Edith Farnese. The guy was offering Reagan tea or coffee, but Reagan himself told the guy that he had some business to take care of. Reagan started telling Mr. Farnese that he came to them because he wanted to clarify a point whose joke had gone too far. The brother began to tell the guy to clarify what he meant. Reagan started talking about how it seems the Farnese house is unable to keep track of even their own family members. Guy started talking about how he wanted to talk to whoever was responsible for Lady Ingrid. Guy started asking Reagan about what he and his sister might have, given the current situation. Reagan began to say that he wanted to know how he ended up getting involved in all of this the day before. Jochen wondered and didn't understand what was going on between Reagan and Ingrid. Reagan was talking to a guy about how she hasn't gotten married yet, even though Jochen calls her a queen. Jochen asked Reagan who cares about that now. The guy was asking the guy about what he thought he was getting away with. Reagan was joking, but Jochen wasn't laughing. Jochen was telling the guy to pay attention to what was going on around him. Reagan smiled and told the guy not to yell or get angry, since not too long ago, the guy was just a little kid. Reagan was telling the guy to look at him now, who was trying to teach Reagan something. For all that, Reagan realized that things would get worse if he didn't act. The guy started calling for Hansen. Reagan started telling the servant that from what he remembered, Count Sartese was very good at getting people's information out. The fellow began to tell the servant to get in touch with him. After a while, Farnese's brother started asking the guy about what he was implying, that publishing this article was in their interest. Endit started telling Reagan that it wasn't, and this article had caused their family a bunch of problems. The brother began to talk about how the Farnese house was already in such a delicate position where they had to watch their every move. Endit began to talk about how their family was now embroiled with the vulgar man Reagan. The boy didn't understand what Endit was trying to accomplish. After a while, Inga came into the room. She started talking about the fact that Reagan had come to see her. The girl started asking the guy how he was doing. Reagan smiled and told the girl that she was more beautiful than ever. Endit looked at all of this and got angry. He didn't like it. Inga started telling her brother to leave them alone. Endit looked at it all and told them that he hoped they would settle things, and Reagan would leave as quickly as possible. Afterward, the brother left the office. Reagan began to ask the girl if she had anything she wanted to say to him. The girl was smiling and talking about what she thought the guy had something to say to her. The guy started talking about Woodson, who was the guard that was supposed to bring a carriage for the girl that night. The wanderer of the closed club Romanvita must be good at keeping secrets. The guy realized that if the world became aware of this night society, the general public would be shocked, so not every strata could bear such tension. Reagan began to talk about the day after the girl's visit. The Guardian received a considerable sum of money from a nobleman who wished to keep his identity secret, and then he immediately quit. Reagan began to say that as far as he knew, he had gone to his hometown, and right after that the article was published. After that, the guy wondered who the author of the anonymous donation was. Reagan dug deeper and deeper, hoping to get to the truth, and eventually the trail led to the damn Farnese family. Inga started telling the guy that he was very good at finding information. Reagan was surprised that the girl didn't even deny it. The guy realized that the girl had no idea who she was messing with. Inga began to tell the guy what she thought. There were still people in this town who didn't know the guy. Reagan asked the girl if she really thought she knew him. The girl was telling the guy to calm down, and Reagan was telling the girl to calm down. The guy started telling the girl not to do that. Reagan was telling the girl to marry whoever the family suggested. Suddenly, Inga started telling the guy that he had once asked why him. The girl began to talk about the fact that Duke Spencer never brought the lady to his house, with all this two collapsed marriages and many other reasons. Inga began to say the most important thing was that neither the brothers nor the father could hurt the guy. The girl continued and began to say that the third, but already successful marriage would not harm the guy. Reagan began to tell the girl what else she wanted to add. The girl began to say that she had already given up hope of finding something that in the end could leave only pain and disappointment behind. Reagan began to ask Inga what it was. The girl looked down at the floor and said that it was love. The girl was talking to the guy about how she doesn't expect love from him, and the guy doesn't seem like someone who will overstep his bounds. Inga talked about the fact that as long as she would be unhappy, the girl was fine with everything. And with all this, the guy could live as he wished. Suddenly, Edwin ran into the room. His brother was screaming and telling Reagan to get his dirty hands off Ingrid. The girl screamed and asked her brother how to understand this and why he was attacking him like this. Edwin yelled at Reagan about how he couldn't just touch Ingrid like that. Meanwhile, Reagan was sitting on the floor asking Edwin how dare he do that. The brother was asking Reagan how dare he flirt with Ingrid. Meanwhile, the kid looked at the younger Farnese and called him an impulsive creep. Time passed. Endit stood in the office, telling everyone that calling a member of the Farnese family an impulsive creep was slightly out of line. Reagan didn't understand why Endit was turning a blind eye to the fact that Edwin had attacked him. Endith began to laugh and told his brother that it was rude to greet an uninvited guest in such a manner. The older brother told Edwin to protect the manor, since that was his job. Endit began to tell his brother to make sure that scumbags like Reagan don't get close to Inga. Reagan realized that these people were just trying his patience. After a while, Inga started asking the boy if he was all right. Reagan was angry at the girl, as he realized that she was the culprit of all this. After a while, the girl gave the guy an envelope. The guy couldn't realize that it sounded like a letter. Meanwhile, Inga began to tell the guy that if he wanted to share the future with her, the guy should send this letter to the ruling family of Severus. Reagan started asking the girl why she couldn't send this letter on her own. The guy was angry and told everyone that he didn't care. And afterward, Reagan started walking towards the exit, saying that they would all pay for it. Afterward, the guy was lying in bed with a girl beside him. Reagan didn't realize what was happening to him, but the guy wouldn't back down. Afterward, morning came. Reagan was lying on the floor and saw Bella in front of him. The girl started to ask the guy who else he wanted to see, and it wasn't that girl from the Farnese family. The guy started asking the girl if she was asleep since Bella was acting clueless. Reagan got up from the floor and took the girl in his arms. Afterwards, he put Bella on the bed. The girl began to ask the guy to lie down with her, but Reagan began to ask her about the fact that aren't they a married couple for such a thing. The girl started asking the guy about aren't two bastards that can't get married. Reagan was telling Belle to shut up and not say such a thing. The girl started yelling to the guy about how she hoped he would beat Hazen to a pulp. As he left, Reagan told the girl that it would happen whether the girl wanted it or not. A short time later, Reagan was sitting in an office with Hazen. Hazen was a business consultant for the Spencer family. Hazen started telling Reagan that he wanted to resign. Reagan started telling the guy to suggest that he find a more workable one. Hazen started telling Reagan about all the rumors spreading all the way to the Morty. The guy started asking Reagan when he and the girl had time to flirt. Hazen started telling everyone that he could barely convince everyone to delay the final answer. Hazen talked to the guy about how he definitely had a talent for derailing all the plans that were already almost perfectly realized. Reagan confessed and talked about how it drives him crazy too. After a while, Hazen started telling the guy that Reagan's ex-girlfriends must have cursed him in order for the guy to get in such serious trouble one day. The guy talked about what he believed was retribution. Reagan looked at Hazen and told him about how nasty he was. Hazen started asking the guy about how many times he had warned the guy to change his lifestyle. Reagan looked at him and asked about whose side he was on. After a while, the business partner saw a letter from Reagan. The guy remembered it and decided to open and read it. The girl wrote a poem to the guy that if he agreed to her proposal, Inga would leave her image in his memory forever. Reagan read it all and wondered if the girl really thought that the girl's questionable poems could break the engagement between the two countries. The guy realized that it seemed like the girl just needed someone to support her. Hazen looked at the guy and asked him what he was up to. Reagan began to tell Hazen that this letter needed to be carefully sealed and sent to Severus, and the senders would not be them, but the person written on the envelope. Reagan began telling Hazen to make sure Ingrid Farnese sent this letter. Also, the guy started telling his partner to get a courier like this who was not associated with this house. The guy started telling Hazen to check that Reagan Spencer had nothing to do with this. And also Reagan started telling the partner to send this letter to Lady Farnese. Reagan started telling the guy to write in a letter that their relationship was over for now, and the guy sincerely hoped that the girl could find the happiness she was looking for. Reagan was not completely sure about Severus, as he realized that it would surely raise a fuss in the Farnese family. Reagan started telling the Farnese family that their sweet little witch would make them wallow in the mud, and all the guy would have to do was sit back and enjoy the show. The guy realized that at least it would end there. After a while, Reagan stood beside the king. His Majesty began scolding the boy and asking him to explain his actions. Reagan did not understand what it was and what His Majesty was talking about. The king started telling Reagan that Inga had told him the whole truth. Reagan was angry at the girl. The king started talking about Inga promising her life to Reagan, and because of that, the girl began to hate the thought of living in Severus. The king began to tell the boy that according to Inga, their words were mutual. His Majesty was saying that even under such circumstances, sending this letter to the ruling family of Severus was highly unacceptable. Reagan looked at the king and told him that he did not understand what letter he was talking about. The king shouted to his servant to bring the letter. Reagan saw the letter he wanted to send. The boy began to tell His Majesty that he didn't know how the letter got in his hands. Reagan began to tell His Majesty that it was a misunderstanding, and that this letter was written by Lady Ingrid, and it was addressed to the King of the North. The king told the boy that the most beautiful daughter of the Farnese family had confessed everything to him. But Reagan continued to lie to the king's face. Reagan began to tell the king that this lady had told him otherwise. His Majesty told the guy that everything was correct, and this letter was written by both of them. The king asked him about the fact that he was the one who sent the compromising letter to ruin the engagement. Reagan talked about how that wasn't true at all, but the king was cursing at the guy and calling him an impertinent fool. His Majesty was telling Reagan that all the proof was right in front of him. The guy begged the king to hear him out, but he wouldn't. Reagan was telling the king that things were not at all as they seemed. The king began to tell the boy to keep quiet. His Majesty began to say that Reagan was very close to Eldis, and when he left this world, the king tried to show special care to Reagan, as the king knew that the lad's pain was as strong as his. His Majesty asked Reagan about forgetting that Inga had been promised to Prince Eldis. The king didn't understand why, out of all of them, Reagan had to choose her. After a while, a servant came to His Majesty and began to tell the king that Queen Marjorie had just fainted. A month later, in a cruel irony of fate, Severus's royal family expressed deep regrets and stated that they would honor Ingrid's wishes. Needless to say, Ingrid's engagement to the Severus royal was broken off. Regan thought about the fact that the girl should have sent a letter to Severus. Regan was angry that he had fallen into the fox trap of the Farnese family. Inga wasn't an easy opponent. The guy shouldn't underestimate her, as she was several steps ahead of him. It was the girl's way of showing that she was indeed a Farnese. Weekly Sarantine, first week of July. In the newspaper, Inga publicly admitted that she admired Duke Regan as Spencer. Everyone was shocked. Bella didn't understand what was going on between Regan and that girl. After a while, the guy had his mom sitting by his side. Clara Spencer asked Regan if he was crazy. Jockin looked at Regan and told him to settle down and think about it. Time passed. The newspaper put out a new news story. All the people were wondering if Regan and Spencer had proposed to Inge. Hazen sat and told the fellow that Regan had visited the Farnese family estate to clear up a misunderstanding. But the piece of paper had turned the fellow's attempt at a marriage proposal. The partner started talking about how sorry he was about the letter, and the postal inspection suddenly got a lot stricter. Regan had told Hazen that everything was fine now, and the very sending of the letter to Severus had been part of that woman's plan. The boy realized that Inga had probably done something about checking the couriers. Hazen started talking about how because of all this, he was talking about leading a more prudent life. The partner began to talk about how now there was not a single person who believed Regan. As time passed, the newspapers never stopped writing. Everyone was wondering if Regan had given up and approved the engagement. The guy couldn't do anything anymore. He was really tired of it. The boy realized he had no chance of the Duke approving of any of this. Regan didn't understand why the Farnese brothers were letting him tangle with this girl even more. The guy realized it was all her doing, and it was entirely Inga's fault. Ingrid is just a lawn with a flower behind her ear. Regan couldn't understand why no one could stop her. After a while, the king started yelling to Hansen about getting the carriage ready as they were heading straight to Farnese Manor. Regan was walking through the Farnese estate and asked the servants if they had seen the Duke of Farnese. The maid began to say that he was absent for the moment, and now there was only Lady Ingrid in the manor. Suddenly, a door opened from the study, and a girl came out of it. Inga started to ask the guy about coming to see her. Regan saw the girl. He was getting very angry. The guy started asking the girl what the hell he was doing. Regan asked the guy if he didn't value life at all. The guy started asking the girl how she could act like that to him. Inga did not make a single sound, and then looked at the guy, and with a calm face told him that she was the daughter of Duke Farnese. Regan's face immediately changed, and he realized he was done for. The guy was sitting in a chair. Hazen walked up to him and asked him if he was going to get ready. Regan sat in the chair and talked about how he was quite enough. Hazen talked to the guy about how Regan was going to have an audience with His Majesty. The partner talked about how those three, Farnese's kids, and they would be watching him. Hazen asked the guy about how he was going to fix the situation, just by looking at the ceiling. Regan got angry and told him about how it was none of his business. The partner started telling the guy to calm down. Hazen was suggesting to the guy to look at the picture that was unfolding in front of the guy. The partner wanted to explain to the guy that it wasn't that bad. The guy talked about Cersabrid changing his mind. And also Hazen started talking about how the Winstein family and the Marquise family had changed their minds, deciding to invest. All of this happened after their engagement to a lady from the Farnese family became known. Regan was talking to his partner about how all of this happened after the guy was sold out. Hazen was telling the guy that by selling himself, Regan would be able to raise the standard of living for thousands of people. Hazen asked the fellow about whether he was going to watch the business collapse because of his pride. The partner began to say that in any case it was inevitable that Lady Ingrid would demand a divorce sometime after their wedding. Hazen assumed the same thing as with their two previous marriages. The partner started telling Regan to just be patient with it until business went on, and after that the guy could file for divorce. Regan realized that his life was too exhausting. Hazen told the guy not to be discouraged because Lan Elvina said she liked Regan, so the partner started telling him to stop throwing a tantrum. the partner started talking about what he had heard, that every man in the capital was willing to give his life just to be in the guy's shoes right now. Reagan didn't know if everyone would have continued to think that if they knew what Ingrid was really like. Hazen started telling the boy to get up, as it was time for the long-awaited family reunion, because Reagan had to go and see his dad. The girl was sitting in her room talking about how she thought her hair looked better with her outfit loose than braided. The maid was telling the girl that she was just going to wear a hat, so she should just brush her hair. The maid looked at the lady and realized that she was in a good mood, but she didn't look really happy. The maid realized that she was probably relieved that the burden had been lifted from her. Inga began to ask the maid to paint her lips red, but not too much. Everyone realized that the girl had changed a lot. Ingrid began to ask the maid what she should do, because Inga liked Reagan so much that she couldn't bear it. One tall young man with light brown eyes that could look very deep into the soul. A man who was as warm as a thick blanket on a cold winter night. Many girls had no choice but to admire him. This guy was Inga's tutor, and he was also the man the young lady fell in love with. This guy's name was Hector Avery. It was obvious that he was also attached to Ingrid. The guy had fallen in love with Inga in return. After all, Ingrid was born to be loved. At a young age, Hector was recognized for his brilliant talent in music. Thanks to the support of Duke Farnese, he was even able to become Ingrid's teacher. However, in the end, the lad was only a commoner without a title. When the Duchess found out about their relationship, Hector received lashes from the Duke until he was on the verge of death. Ingrid was forced to sit still and watch. Then, left limping for life due to injuries, the lad was banished from the mansion. Inga yelled to her father that she was sorry, and it was her fault. A few days later, Ingrid learned the whereabouts of the Hector. The girl tried to escape from the house, taking with her only a bag of jewelry. But her attempt was thwarted by Elsa, who out of her anxiety informed someone of Ingrid's plans. The maid cried and told Ing that she had every right to be angry with her. The girl was telling Elsa that everything was fine. After that day, Ingrid never said a word about Hector. Inga didn't let on, but the maid could always tell that the girl couldn't forget him. The maid wondered why Inga had chosen a man like Reagan. The maid started asking the girl if she really wanted to go. Inga smiled, hugged the maid and told her that everything would be fine, and she was fine. After a while, Inga ran up to Endit. Inga started asking him about the fact that he had come to see her off. The girl asked her brother if she looked nice. Endit did not look at the girl and told her not to make mistakes in front of his and her majesty. The brother talked about how if Inga realized that it would be too late to go back, she should send word to her brother. And then Endit would go after the girl. Inga began to ask her brother if he would be on her side and support her. The girl told her brother that if he stopped being angry with her, he could call her Inga again. Endit hugged the girl and told her to hurry up. Palace Gate. Younger brother Envid shouted at his father and asked her if they were really all going to see the king. The father yelled at his son and asked her how dare he raise his voice in public. Envid told his father about the horrible man Reagan Spencer taking their Inga away. Envid asked his father about whether there was any point to this wedding. His father got off the carriage and began to tell Envid that his younger sister must have learned such recklessness from him. The father got angry and talked about how even though he was against it, his brother still stood in his way even when his sister was about to marry another man. Envid yelled and told his father that this was Reagan Spencer and the girl should not marry him. The father was telling his brother to watch his tongue as their king's blood runs through this man's veins. The father was telling his son about how he has no idea how he feels right now. The woman in the carriage was watching the whole spectacle. She was not happy about this conflict. Edwin's mother began to tell her son that she understood exactly what Edwin was trying to say, but that her son was forbidden to go against the marriage that the king had blessed. Edwin began to tell his mother that apparently she did not know what rumors were going around about this man. Trisha Farnese began asking her son about where he learned such pouty behavior. The mother asked her son about what he thought she should be treated like a hearing-impaired person. Edwin began to tell the mother that this was not what she thought. Mother started telling Edwin that she did not marry a man with no dignity, and also mother does not remember giving birth to such a foolish son. The mother began to tell Edwin to come home, as he could not stand before the king like this. The mother asked him who to blame. since this girl is just as devious as the rest of her family. The sons wanted to say something to the mother, but Trisha Farnese interrupted them and told them that they would be late. After a while, the mother told to depart as otherwise they might be late. Some time passed, dinner began, and everyone sat around the huge table. His Majesty began to ask Duke Farnese what he thought about it. Duke Farnese began to tell His Majesty that this situation was not quite easy, but he was His Majesty's son. The Duchess admitted that it was a great honor for him to do this for their family. Everyone realized that even if the situation escalated, the Duchess would be prevented from doing so in the most extreme case. His Majesty didn't realize if there was any point to these conversations at all. His Majesty will certainly not let this happen. Suddenly, Regan began to be asked about spring, as everyone thought it was the most favorable time to hold a wedding. The guy was shocked at such a question. Everyone started looking at the guy and asking him what was wrong with him. Regan started telling everyone that it was all very sudden, and the guy hadn't even informed his mother in Manhwa yet. His Majesty began to say that then they could postpone their further discussions about the wedding date. His Majesty began to ask everyone to forgive them for such sudden news. No one could understand what was going on and why everything was going as it should. Suddenly, His Majesty stopped and began to tell the Duchess that there was something he wanted to say to the girl. Duke Farnese was telling Regan that no words from the boy would change what they had done. Trisha Farnese began to tell everyone that somehow her daughter herself wished to be thrown into the abyss of the table of nothingness chaos, so now the girl is bound to Regan. The guy was surprised that Trisha Farnese would so willingly give her daughter away to a man like him. The mother started talking about how her daughter is a beautiful lady. Trisha Farnese started asking the boyfriend about why he was treating her like that. Regan didn't understand what the woman meant. The mother began to talk about how it appeared to her that the guy was unhappy with her Inga. Her mother was about to leave and talked about how if they let her know, she would make sure she got a proper education before going to them. The guy didn't understand what was going on or what the hell was going on. Inga started asking the guy if he was okay. Regan became angry and told the girl not to touch him. After a while, the guy started to walk away, but the girl ran after him. Inga started telling the guy that she looked very upset, and it made the girl more and more worried. The girl started talking about how sorry she was, as the girl realized that their relationship didn't have the best start, but Inga wanted to slowly start getting to know each other. But Regan didn't like it. The guy yelled to the girl to leave him alone and not to touch him. Inga saw that the guy had an unhealthy complexion. The girl asked the guy if he was not feeling well. The girl noticed that the guy had dark bags under his eyes, and he was sweating all the time. Regan didn't understand what the girl was talking about and what unhealthy complexion she was talking about. The guy started asking the girl, wondering why this happened and whose fault it was. Suddenly, the girl started talking about how sorry she was. Regan was telling the girl that she was extremely successful in ruining his whole life, and now she was just apologizing. The guy wanted to smoke some Valium cigars right now. Regan decided that he needed to drink some whiskey first. Suddenly, he noticed that the girl was looking at the royal band. Regan noticed that Inga at Endit's wedding was looking at them too. The guy decided that no one cared and decided to leave. Time passed and Regan lay in bed. Regan started to ask himself how he got home and how long he slept. The guy started talking about how he wanted a drink. Regan was given some water, and as soon as he drank it, he started talking about how it was liquor. The guy started talking about how it was water, and Regan himself wasn't awake yet. Regan started to look at the mess he had made in the room. The guy realized that he seemed to have a new drinking habit. Regan's mom started asking everyone if he was awake yet. They started telling him that the kid was already awake and he was thirsty. Regan didn't understand what his mom was doing here. His mother started telling Inga that she thought it was silly to expect proper behavior if the guy was so drunk that he had to crawl here. Regan sat on the bed and thought about the fact that he was probably still drunk. After a while, the boy was sitting in a chair. He had a cigarette in his hands that he wanted to light. But Regan's mom snatched it away, saying that she was sure it was all full of drugs. Sitting across from the boy was Inga, who was looking at Regan with a smile. The Duchess began to talk about the fact that she had asked Inga to come, since Regan's mother had wanted to meet her for a long time. The girl began to thank the Duchess for the invitation. The mother began to remember that Inga loved the piano. The Duchess, with a smile on her face, began to tell the girl that she would be sure to order a piano made by the artisans of Ereban, and it would be installed before the girl arrived. Inga began to tell her mistress that nothing would make her happier than this mother. Regan's mother began to tell the girl that when she looked at her, she saw that Duchess Farnese must be truly amazing. The Duchess began to ask Inga how she had managed to grow up to be such a dignified and elegant lady. Regan looked at it all and realized that no one knew her completely yet. The boy started talking about how he had heard his mother say that there was nothing about that stupid witch from the house of Farnese but her smarmy face. The mother was very angry with her son, but suddenly Regan was interrupted by Inga, who started talking about how their mother was more amazing because she had raised 2 outstanding sons. The Duchess began to tell Inga that Regan would not be so easily shortchanged since he is the son of a king, and so many people are only led by his looks, forgetting about his character. Inga smiled and told her mother about how Regan was a very good man. The boy looked at both of them. Regan got angry and told the girl to get the hell out of his house. The mother immediately started yelling at her son and asking him how he dared to speak so rudely to Lady Ingrid. Inga began to say that she was fine and she already knew and was used to Regan's manner of speech. After a while, the guy got up from the chair and realized that he had to leave. Inga started telling the guy that she thought they could have dinner with his mom. Regan started telling Inga that it was none of her business where the guy was going. The mom figured the guy was going back to that night society. Regan started telling his mother that a man like him is very unpredictable. The guy talked about how he sells himself and drinks heavily, the kind of life the guy was born to live. Regan started telling them that they could have dinner alone without him. Inga was still running after the guy and yelling after him. The guy abruptly grabbed the girl and started telling her that as soon as his business got better, he would turn the tables and everything else at their wedding. The guy was telling the girl to keep her head down until then if she didn't want to get hurt. Inga told the guy that she understood, and then the girl pulled out some white square thing from their hands. Regan started asking the girl what it was. The girl began to tell Regan that it was his handkerchief. The guy had lent it to the girl last time. Inga was telling the guy that she was bringing him back. The girl left with a smile on her face and told the guy that it was a reflection of her feelings. Afterward, Inga told the guy to have a good time. Regan looked at the handkerchief and saw the fact that there was a rose drawn on it. The guy thought it was pointless and left. After a while, Hazen was telling the guy to wake up, but Regan yelled at his partner and told him to fuck off. Suddenly, Hazen saw Regan's mother and started asking about when she arrived. Also, the partner was very surprised as he saw Lady Ingrid in front of him. Hazen couldn't help himself and told the girl about how damn beautiful she was. Inga started to tell the guy about what she believes. He just blurted out what was on his mind. Regan's mother started talking about how it hadn't been that long since Regan had left. The mother was wondering how he was already in such a sorry state. Hazan started telling his mother that he didn't know what exactly had happened since the guy never got very drunk. Regan's mother started telling Inga that it was getting late and she needed to go home. The girl talked to her mother about staying a little longer. Inga talked about how she would feel uncomfortable all evening if she didn't take care of Regan before she left. The mother looked at the girl and told her to do as she wanted. The mother started telling Hazen to go downstairs and get something to drink after she put Regan to bed. The guy was yelling and telling everyone to get the hell away from him and disappear, since the guy didn't want to see anyone. Hazen apologized to Inga and told her that Regan usually doesn't act like that when he drinks. The girl started telling her partner that it was probably because of her. Hazen began telling the girl to ignore him as his tantrums would subside and everything would be fine. The partner talked about how Regan had already made similar performances before his previous 2 weddings. When it was decided that he would marry Madame Estra, his second wife, the guy brought a pregnant woman, with whom he was not in any relationship, and said that this girl was carrying his child. Hazen told everyone that the guy had a lot of pride in him. The guy has always been the one who holds the power. Regan is left fooled for the first time, and Inga doesn't give him a chance to fight back. The girl began to tell the doctor that she would take care of Regan. The partner told the girl that such an activity was not suitable for such a noble girl as she was, so Hazen wanted to call for a maid, but Inga interrupted him and said that she wanted to do it herself. The girl asked Hazen not to worry about her. After a while, night came, Reagan was sleeping, and Inga was sitting next to her on the bed, looking at the guy. Inga couldn't believe that the guy hated her that much. The girl didn't think about the fact that everything was so horrible that the guy had to bring himself to the point where he had to endure all of this. Suddenly, Reagan grabbed the girl's arm with all his might and pulled her towards him. The guy told the girl to take off her clothes, but Inga tried to tell him that it was wrong and they shouldn't do that. Reagan lay on the girl's chest and closed his eyes. Inga looked at the guy and then hugged him and fell asleep with him. Morning came. Reagan sat on the bed and looked in surprise at Inga lying next to him. The guy couldn't believe that he was drunk and off his rocker. After a while, the girl started asking the guy how he slept. The girl smiled and looked at the guy. Suddenly, Inga started talking about how now that they had spent the night in the same room, they could actually tell the others that they had done it. The guy was shocked by this and was speechless, but the girl smiled and told Reagan that she was joking. The girl started to tell the guy about it. His face twisted so much that she felt a little embarrassed. Reagan tried to remember what had happened last night. Inga started to talk about how she was going to go home, even though it was late. But the guy was really clinging to the girl, and it wasn't a situation where Inga could call someone. The guy looked at the girl and told her that she was crazy for spending the whole night in a room with a drunken inadequate. Inga started telling the guy about how things are, not as he thinks, and the guy didn't do anything wrong to Inga. The girl started asking Reagan if he knew that he had been grumbling all night about not seeing the girl. Inga started asking the guy why she was so disgusted with him. Reagan started telling the girl about what she was asking because she really doesn't know. The girl started telling Reagan about how she was wrong to make things happen the way she wants them to. Inga was telling the guy that she really wanted to be with him. The girl was telling Reagan that they were very close to Prince Eldis. Inga said that she couldn't love him, but he gave her more love than the girl deserved. And for that, Inga was eternally grateful to the guy. Reagan began to sincerely ask the girl for forgiveness. Inga started telling Reagan that she no longer had the right to demand anything from him. The girl was telling the guy that if he told her that he hated her and told her to leave, the girl would leave without any questions asked. Reagan started asking Inga about this being another one of her some other plans. But Inga began to tell Reagan that she was speaking sincerely, and it was true. The guy began to tell the girl that he had already said it many times and was ready to say it again. The girl began to tell the guy that she understood everything, and after Inga apologized for all the trouble she had caused him, the girl thanked the guy for not being sent to Severus. Inga promised to pay back this debt to Reagan. After a while, Inga began to say goodbye to the guy, and then the door closed behind the girl. Reagan was shocked that everything went very quickly. Outside the window, the boy saw Farnese's carriage. Reagan realized that they had come for Ingrid, since the girl had not returned home last night. Suddenly, the door opened, and Duke Farnese entered the study. The father started yelling at Inga and calling her names. The girl told her father that she was sorry, but the father did not want to listen to the girl. The father yelled at the girl and asked her if she would continue to do this to him until the day she died. The father started telling Ing to tell her to tell Reagan to come out and show herself. The boy listened to all of this and realized that the father really wasn't watching his language. Suddenly, Reagan's mother came up to her son and started asking him what the commotion was about. The mother saw Inga and asked her about her being here since last night. Father yelled at the whole estate about how he didn't care how famous he was as a Daganareth. Duke Farnese yelled for Reagan to go to him. Reagan's mother became angry and started talking about how this old man seemed to have lost the remnants of his mind. Reagan didn't want his mother to deal, so he blocked his mother with his hand. Inga yelled at her father about how Reagan Spencer had done nothing wrong. The girl talked about how it was all her fault since Inga was frivolous. The father started touching the girl, squeezing her and telling her to be quiet. Inga didn't like this. She yelled at her father not to do that. After a while, the father grabbed the girl by the arm and carried her to the exit. Inga yelled to her father not to worry about it. After a while, Reagan started walking towards the girl. The girl asked him not to go and not to interfere in this. The guy started asking the girl about not being able to walk through his own house already. Out of the corner of his eye, the father noticed Regan a Spencer. The guy started telling Duke Farnese about how he was quite busy since early in the morning. The Duke started yelling at Regan, telling him that he dared to lay his hands on her daughter when he was still alive and well. Regan started telling Duke that he would leave it up to their speculation whether he touched his daughter or not. The guy started talking about how, even if he is her father, Inga will still become Regan's wife by the king's blessing. Regan asked the Duke about how dare he attack and insult her. Duchess Farnese yelled and asked Regan how dare he say that to him. Guy started telling the Duke that if he hated her so much, he could go to His Majesty and the Duke and tell the king that the Duke would not allow his precious daughter to marry a scum like Regan. The guy asks the Duke if he would insult the king's son by looking him in the face. The Duke of Farnese didn't like it. He was shaking with anger and didn't know what to say to him. Also, Regan started talking about how if one hair fell off Ingrid de Spencer, the boy would talk to the king about it. Regan's mother was shocked. She realized that this boy was still on a roll. And afterward, Regan started telling the Duke that for his information, nothing happened last night. The guy was telling Farnese that he'd raised a pretty decent daughter, and if Regan had actually had fun with her last night, the guy wouldn't feel so undeservedly insulted now. The father didn't want to say anything and said that they were coming back. Inga approached the guy before leaving and started calling out to him. Regan noticed that the girl's hair was in disarray. The girl began to ask the guy about whether all his words were true. The girl leaned over to the boy and with a smile told him to decide on a date as soon as possible. After a while, the girl left and Regan looked after her. The mother began to ask the boy if he had slept with Inga, but Regan began to tell the lady that she shouldn't get so involved in other people's sex lives. The mother started telling Regan that he was not just some stranger to her, but her son. And then the mother started telling her son that Regan should make a baby with Inge as soon as possible, as the boy should realize that this is not just some mediocre girl. Regan realized that he needed to save his business first. In his hand, the boy held the handkerchief Inga had given him back. Regan threw it on the floor and left. News of this scandal quickly reached the king. Regan and Duke Farnese were both invited to the palace. Regan was fiercely interrogated, but the guy didn't fight back for fear of making the situation worse. Because of this incident, the date of Regan and Ingrid's wedding was moved from the original plan, so it was decided that the wedding would take place in January. Mid-November, Roman Witte nightclub. Baron screamed in Regan's face and asked him about why it was so hard to see him. Parquet asked Baron to not be so creepy and not act like that. Baron started asking the guy what Farnese told him and if they wanted to call off the engagement. Regan told the Baron that he wished it was true. The Baron couldn't believe that the boy was really getting married. The guy was angry and realized that after everything Regan had done, the guy was lucky to get the most beautiful girl in Valentine as his third wife. The Baron told himself that their world was too unfair. Regan listened to all this and afterward put his foot to the guy's head and asked him if he was tired of living. Baron started asking the guy to pardon it. Regan spied Daniel asking why he was sticking up for him. Baron looked at the guy and asked him if Lady Ingrid knew him. Regan was telling the guy about the girl being a white doe or not. The guy wanted to beat the shit out of the asshole who gave her that nickname. Baron started talking to the guy about how it's a pretty famous story. The guy started talking about how it was a royal musician. He was the first to call her a white sloth. Hector Avery, the Baron had heard that he had been Lady Ingrid's personal teacher in the past. Regan realized that Ingrid was always looking for Hector Avery in musicians and watching him. The Baron began to ask the lad if he had a thing for the girl. Regan began to ask the Baron about whether to give him another beating. After a while, Bella came up to Regan. The girl began to get on the guy. The Baron looked at all this and asked the girl about the fact that she always gets turned on when she sees Regan. The girl didn't like it and splashed whiskey at the guy. Bella looked at Regan and talked about how they hadn't seen each other in a while. The guy started to ask the girl if she had gotten better. Bella smiled and told him that maybe Regan had been twirling around the cane like Lady Farnese for too long. The guy smiled and told the girl that he couldn't be sure until he experienced Bella. Suddenly, the girl slipped out of Regan's arms and began to tell him that she had to think about the fact that the guy had been messing around with that trash from the Farnese house, and the girl was disgusted. Reagan started telling the girl to get out. Bella started asking the guy if he slept with her. The girl had heard that their wedding was next month, so Bella wondered if the girl was pregnant. Reagan was reminded of someone by Bella. The guy's second wife liked to get hysterical over nothing, just like Bella. She was so obsessive that she herself couldn't take it anymore and left. Reagan started telling Bella about how she was the one who made fun of her the most. Bella asked the guy why he was comparing her to her. The guy started telling the girl to get lost. Bella started getting on the guy and telling him about how he likes it when she does that. But Reganu pushed her away this time and told her to leave. The guy asked the girl not to ruin his mood. After a while, Edwin Farnese started coming up to Reagan. Baron began to ask Edwin why he came to them in a suit and why he came here. The brother started asking Reagan to come out and talk. The kid started asking Edwin about if he had grown up. Edwin began to tell Reagan that he knows the whole truth of what has happened up to this point. The brother was talking about how he knows this is part of his sister's plan. Reagan was talking to the guy about how he turns out he's not a complete idiot. Edwin was asking the guy if he was really going to get married. Reagan started talking about how if the guy doesn't understand how to be respectful, he might as well not even try. Edwin started asking Reagan if he was really going to marry his sister. Reagan started asking the guy about how he could say no when the girl practically jumped him. Edwin talked to the guy about how it would be best for him to keep his finger off his sister. Reagan began to ask Edwin about why he thought the guy didn't do it, because Reagan was sure that the younger brother had heard about the night they had spent with Inga. Edwin started yelling at the guy about saying that nothing had happened, but Reagan started asking the guy about, since when did his words have any credibility? His brother started telling the kid about how completely crazy this was. Reagan smiled and said that's how he felt until recently, and it's all thanks to Edwin's family. The guy was telling Edwin Farnese to turn himself in so it would be easier. Edwin started asking the guy something. Farnese asked Reagan about whether he really thought his sister was doing all of this because he really loved Reagan. The brother started talking about how he was just reporting that the guy was deluded and Inga didn't like him. Reagan smiled and looked at Edwin. And afterward, the guy started talking about how Inga didn't say that when she moaned under him. The brother was angry and couldn't believe what the guy was saying. Reagan continued and asked Edwin if he had seen Ingrid's breasts. The guy talked about how Inga's breasts were pale and beautiful, and Edwin would be surprised to know how big she had them. Reagan started talking about how the girl has a beautiful waist that accentuates her. Edwin started yelling at the guy and telling him to shut up. Reagan calmly started asking the guy about how he was going to beat him up like he did last time. The guy was telling Edwin to hit him. Reagan was telling Farnese that it was time to teach him and their family a lesson. The guy wanted to make sure that lesson was learned. After a couple of seconds, Edwin Farnese let the guy go and moved a couple of feet away from him. Afterward, the brother decided to say something to Reagan. Edwin started telling Reagan that his sister had someone she loved so much that she was willing to sacrifice her life for him. It was Hector Avery. Edwin talked about him being Ingrid's teacher 2 years ago. When Father Farnese found out about their relationship, Hector was beaten to a pulp and banished from their estate. Edwin heard that Hector is still in Elven and the guy thinks he's now a court musician or something. Reagan started telling his brother about Inga choosing him over the man, so it's not like the girl ever risked anything for him. Edwin started talking about how this commoner almost died right in front of Inga's eyes, and the girl didn't give a damn about her own reputation. All Inga is afraid of is watching him get hurt. Edwin began to tell Reagan not to sneer, as the reason Inga wants to stay in this town is because of Hector Avery being here. Bella, putting aside her pride, came to see Reagan at his estate, but the guy coldly kicked her out. Ingrid also came several times to discuss plans for their wedding, but was unable to see Reagan because Reagan was always in his room under the influence of drugs. Time was running out. The ballroom at the Spencer estate, everyone was congratulating Reagan on the joyous occasion. The guy was shocked by this, but told everyone that they were right and that was the way it was. Before anyone knew it, the day had come. The wedding of Reagan Spencer and Ingrid Farnese. Adele walked up to Reagan and congratulated him on his wedding. The boy thanked the lady. After a while, Bantley Roboam came up to Lady Adele. The girl started telling the guy about how great he looked. Regan watched them and didn't realize if they were crazy or not. Regan wondered where the Baron had gone. Meanwhile, he was standing and chatting sweetly with some lady. One girl with red hair was watching the Baron. It was Lisa, the second daughter of the Minister of Military Affairs. Hazen was also chatting with some people and telling them that the Spencer family was investing in the railroad business. Regan could see that Hazan was working hard. The guy realized that even if it was a wedding, he should try to escape when the time was right. Suddenly, the guy was approached by his older brother Raymond. It was as if he read the guy's mind and asked him if Regan was going to elope like he did at his past 2 weddings. Regan was surprised by his brother and started to listen to him. Raymond started talking about how it was the right thing to do, and Regan should stop causing so many problems and settle down once and for all. Regan didn't like it, but he told his brother that he would try to do it. His brother began to talk about how he had come as a representative of the royal family, but he was sure that his father would be watching the 2 of them. It was known that his father had the royal orchestra play during the event to keep the hall lively. After a while, the Duchess of Farnese and her sons entered the estate. Raymond began to tell Regan about how he had never seen Duke Farnese anywhere. Regan started telling his brother about how he said he wouldn't attend because he wasn't feeling well. The boy realized that his father hadn't even bothered to bother with an excuse. Regan realized that it would be one thing for him if his father didn't show up. Suddenly, one of Kyle's friends started calling Ingrid Farnese. The girl looked at Inga and told her about how she was very beautiful and looked simply divine. Kayla was telling the girl that she had never seen her with her hair like that. Suddenly, Kayla changed in her face and started telling the girl that her fiancé was trying to blackmail the girl. Inga smiled and started talking about how that wasn't true, and she was the one who wanted this wedding. Kayla was surprised at that answer. Inga didn't explain anything and talked about how she would tell everything later. Everyone knew that the wedding ceremony would begin any minute now. Inga stood across from Regan and looked at him. The guy tried not to talk to her, but Regan did not understand why she was so beautiful. After a while, the ceremony began. Everyone was shouting and cheering. The Farnese family looked at Inga, and there was anger and hatred on their face. The Baron looked at Inga and Regan with tears in his eyes and joy. After a while, the girl stopped. Edwin did not understand what was happening. Inga began to look in the distance, looking for someone with her eyes. Regan noticed this and didn't understand what was going on or why she was so agitated. After a while, the orchestra showed up at the estate. Regan saw with his own eyes Hector Avery. Inga saw Hector too, looked at him, and then lowered her gaze full of sadness. Edwin was angry and started asking everyone about why the royal orchestra was in this place. Regan looked at the girl and saw how sad she was. The guy immediately remembered the conversation with Edwin, where he said that the girl stayed for Hector's sake. The guy started to smile and realized that this was a very interesting development. As time passed, Regan and Inga stood at the altar. The man asks Regan if he agrees to take Lady Ingrid Farnese as his lawful wedded wife, to be with her and watch over her in sickness and in health, and if he swears to keep the girl safe and fulfill his duties as her husband. Regan looked at the orchestra, specifically at the Hector who was doing all of this. The man was calling out to the boy because he wanted to hear him answer. Regan smiled, realizing that there was no way out of this. The man began to ask Lady Ingrid if he would promise to become Duchess Spencer of Manhwa and devote himself to the love of her husband without a shadow of shyness. The girl looked away and said she would promise. Regan noticed that the girl was quite collected. The guy didn't understand where the girl got so much guile from. The man asked Regan if he agreed. The guy said he did. The man started to talk about the fact that then they were crossing over, but he didn't have time to say it, because Regan pulled the girl to him and kissed her passionately. The Baron looked at all of this and drooled in amazement. Eldest brother Raymond realized that Regan was doing it on purpose, and the sons of the Farnese family were out of their minds with anger. After a while, Regan called out to the conductor. The guy started talking about how he had heard that Hector Avery was pretty famous. The guy bowed to Regan and told him about how it was a great honor for him to hear such words from a guy. Reagan started telling him about playing the hottest and most passionate music he knows. Reagan smiled and told him about how tonight his third wife would be screaming with pleasure under him until the wee hours of the morning. The guy smiled and talked about how he wouldn't want the people who attended their reception to hear this. Hector looked at the floor and there was no way he could move. The guy with a smile on his face started to ask the conductor what was wrong with him. Reagan asked him about whether he needed to mangle his fingers so that it would be an incentive to move. After a while, the conductor began to play. Reagan's mother began to ask Jokin what had gotten into him. The mother hoped that her son had not taken drugs before his own wedding. Jokin realized that couldn't be the case since Prince Raymond was attending the wedding. Edwin could not calm down. He shouted to his brother to let him go, but Endit did not even try to do that, because no one wanted to get into trouble. Afterward, night fell. Reagan lay on his bed and realized that today was a very horrible day. Reagan's mother immediately ran into his room and started asking him if he knew what he was doing. His mother didn't understand how a guy could leave his wife right after they got married. Duchess yelled for Reagan to go downstairs and take his seat. Reagan turned away from everyone and talked about how the wedding ceremony was over, so his job was done. Jokin looked at the guy and told him about how this was too much since Prince Raymond was still at the estate. The mother started yelling and talking about how she had had enough. The Duchess started asking her son about how much longer he was going to embarrass her. Reagan started yelling at everyone to just leave him alone and stay away from him. The boy yelled at Jokin to escort his mother out of his room. After a while, Duchess started to feel not so good. Jokin started telling his mom to hurry to her room, and afterward, the boy was left alone. Thin strands, tangled like spider webs, began to slowly peel off around the guy's neck, one by one. Reagan decided he needed more alcohol. The darkness slowly crept up on the guy and began to consume his entire body from head to toe. The guy wanted very badly for everything to disappear in that darkness. After a while, the guy woke up. Reagan didn't realize how long he had been asleep. Out of the corner of his eye, Reagan noticed that Inga was lying next to him and sleeping. The guy realized that today, he had married this girl, and he had done it against his own will. Inga made so much trouble and ended up marrying a guy just to stay here over some hectoring. Reagan started calling out to Ingrid, but she turned away from him and wouldn't turn around. The guy started telling the girl that he knew she was awake. Reagan asked Inga how long she was going to resist. The girl still didn't turn toward the guy and talked about how tired she was. Reagan turned the girl over and saw Inga covering her face with her hand. The guy realized that the girl was crying. Reagan asked the girl to look at him, but she didn't want to do it. Inga was telling the guy that she had washed off her makeup, so she didn't want to show herself to him. Reagan took the girl's hands away and was telling her about not making a fool of herself. Inga was lying on the bed with her eyes full of tears. The girl started talking about how she was sad because her family was gone. Reagan talked to the girl about how he wasn't turned on by crying girls, so Inga should stop everything. The girl covered her face with her hands and talked about how she was getting a little sad. The guy wanted to get up and leave, but the girl tugged on his shirt. The girl started calling out for the guy, but Reagan was telling her to let him go. Inga was telling the guy about how she won't cry anymore. The girl was telling Reagan not to leave since tonight was their first night. Reagan started calling out to the girl, calling her Ingrid Farnese. The girl corrected the guy and told him about the fact that she was now Ingrid Spencer. The guy started asking the girl why Reagan started asking the girl about if she was going to cry her eyes out over their wedding night. Why cling to the guy and drive him crazy? The girl leaned over and made a comment about how he was right, and it shouldn't have been Reagan. But the girl had decided to stay exactly with him. Inga really wanted them to get along. Reagan pushed the girl with all his might and told her about how she really didn't know what kind of person Reagan was. The girl started asking Reagan to tell her. Reagan began to tell the girl about Inga saying that this man wasn't supposed to be him. But one day, the girl decided to fall into his arms, and now it could only be Reagan. The guy started telling the girl that from now on, the girl should take her precious time to scrutinize the person she had dragged into her selfish game. Afterward, the guy kissed the girl. After a while, the newlyweds had something more than love. The guy started asking the girl about whether she still missed the embrace of that pathetic royal musician. Reagan asked the girl about how many times she had done it with him. The guy graciously allowed him to tell the girl anything. The girl didn't answer anything. Then Reagan got out of bed and noticed something. The boy picked up the candles and saw that there was a bloodstain on the bed. Reagan was confused. He couldn't say for sure if it was because Ingrid was a virgin or because the drug had stopped working, and he realized that the moans coming from her lips were not of pleasure, but of pain. It's like the guy was raping her. A month later, Reagan's routine hadn't changed. He still paid as little attention to his responsibilities and social life, reveling in alcohol, drugs, and women. With the slight difference that when he indulged in other women, he remembered his wife's face contorted with pain. A month later, mad and drunk, Reagan returned home. The maid tried to help the gentleman, but Reagan told her that he was fine and she could go. The guy cleaned himself up a bit, and afterward, he heard someone playing the piano beautifully. Reagan started asking the girl which room the piano was playing in. Inga began to cook the guy about the fact that since he decided to listen to her performance, the girl wanted the guy to share his opinion. Reagan decided that the girl had been taught how to play by the man. The guy looked at Inga and told her that she was disgusting. The girl started telling the guy about how his mom said that Reagan had a great talent for the game. The guy was telling the girl about how he was definitely better than her. The girl asked the guy if he would play for her. Reagan answered the girl briefly, no. Suddenly, the girl touched the guy's ear. Inga began to tell Reagan that he looked much better than he did in the morning when he got home. The girl asked the guy if he was well rested. Reagan turned away and told the girl about how he was the one who should have asked her that. The guy told the girl that she looked pretty good. The guy started asking the girl why she didn't say it was her first time. Inga started asking the guy about whether he thought it was too cruel to consider his wife a promiscuous woman. The girl talked about how people say the first time always hurts. Inga asked the guy if he was sorry. The girl started telling the guy that if he was really sorry, he could play for Inga. Reagan started to tell the girl that he hates it when someone watches him play. The girl smiled at the guy and said that she was the only one here and no one else. Reagan started telling Inga that he admired the person who gave the girl the nickname White Doe, as the guy was amazed at this person's attention to detail. Afterward, the guy started asking the girl if she really wanted to listen. Inga asked the guy if he would allow it. Reagan began to tell the girl that if it was for his spouse, he could play something. The guy took the girl quickly and put her on the piano. The girl started to call out to the guy in surprise. Reagan began to tell the girl about what she herself had told him to play. The girl was talking to the guy about how they could ruin the instrument, but the guy was talking about how they could buy a new one, and Reagan would find a much better one for the girl than this one. Inga started asking the guy if they could move into their bedroom. Reagan started asking the girl how she liked his lesson. Guy asked the girl if she realized what Reagan was like now. Reagan was now hugging Ingrid, being of sober mind. Not satisfied once, they continued in the bedroom. The girl thanked the guy for being gentle, and also the girl apologized to him. Reagan sat stunned and didn't understand what the hell she was talking about or what she was trying to say. It was morning. Inga was already in the dining room in full swing. The girl started telling the maid that after they set the table, she would have to help in the kitchen and also prepare the appetizers they had talked about yesterday. The maid began to tell the girl that she would start making soup for her hangover. After a while, the maid noticed the gentleman and said hello to him. Inga asked the boy if he was awake. The girl talked about the fact that she had already ordered to prepare breakfast. The guy was telling the girl that there was no need for that, and Inga could go back to bed. The girl did not understand what the guy wanted from her, so she decided to ask him what he wanted. Reagan began to tell the girl that he was just giving instructions to the servants to prepare their breakfast. Inga started asking the guy if he could wait a little longer. The guy started to say that if the Duchess was busy, nothing could be done. After a while, Reagan started telling the maid that he was waiting for her in the bedroom. The girl was very much frightened and did not know what to do. The guy sat in the chair and thought about what Inga was going to do now this time. The maid walked in on Guy and told him that she had come in to run errands for Reagan. The lad couldn't figure out what kind of woman she was. One day, Reagan was fancying himself up and getting dressed. Inga asked the guy about going somewhere. The guy didn't say anything and left. The girl with a smile on her face began to say that this morning the boy's mother had sent someone from Manhwa. The mother was interested in when they would be traveling to Manhwa to familiarize themselves with the property. Reagan started telling Inga to just ignore it, and he would take care of everything himself. Inga began to ask the guy if he could tell her more, as the waiting was too tiring for her. Reagan started talking about how he thought the girl wanted to stay in Alvin. Inga began to tell the boy that they would be back. The guy couldn't understand anything, his head was a mess. The girl started asking the guy about spending the night out. Reagan didn't answer anything and just left. Inga looked after him and told him to take care of himself. After a while, the boy went into the Baron's house and opened the door with his foot. The Baron choked with surprise and asked the boy what the hell he was doing. Reagan didn't answer anything and just lay down. The Baron started asking the guy what was wrong with him and if the nice ones were swearing. Reagan answered nothing and told the Baron to shut up and get out. Baron started looking at the guy in surprise and told Reagan about this being his house. Reagan asked the guy about having some kind of problem. The Baron began to talk about how he had no problems. A few seconds later, the door opened and Adele ran into the room. The girl was crying and calling for Daniel. Baron, from surprise, started asking her what she was doing here. The girl ran into the guy and hugged him. Reagan looked at all of this and didn't understand what was going on here. The boy began to ask the two if they were dating. The Baron and the girl loudly answered no. Adele started to ask Duke Reagan what brought him here. The guy started looking at the girl, and afterward, Reagan started telling Adele that it hurt him to hear that the girl was using formal speech when talking to him. The guy was telling the girl to just address him as if they were alone. The girl got angry and said she was leaving. Baron tried to stop her. Daniel took the girl's hand and started asking her what was wrong. The boy began to tell Adele to start by telling her to explain herself to him. Adele started crying even louder and asking the Baron how she should be. Guy looked at Reagan and shrugged his shoulders. Reagan, meanwhile, sat on the couch one more time and talked about how this was all just another load of crap. After a while, night fell. Baron asked the girl to repeat herself so he could make sure he heard everything correctly. Adele was in tears talking about what she had carried. The Baron yelled at the girl and asked her if she was out of her mind or what, since if the Count found out, he would rip the girl to shreds. The girl covered her face with her hands and asked what she should do. Meanwhile, Reagan, with a smile on his face, told everyone that it was such a relief. The girl didn't understand anything, and once again asked the guy what he wanted to say. Reagan started to say that considering that there had been no intimacy between them for the past few months, the burden was not his. The girl got angry and told the guy that someone's life was on the line right now. Reagan began to ask the girl about the fact that didn't she think her promiscuous affairs were funny? Adele yelled at Reagan and told him that it was all his fault and it was his fault. The guy didn't understand what the girl was saying and said that she was really out of her mind. The girl began to say that it all happened because of Reagan's marriage. The guy didn't understand what was going on, since he got married and Adele had the baby. Reagan began to ask him about whether it was some sort of immaculate conception. Adele didn't answer anything. Reagan started telling the girl that if it was a decent guy, she could just marry him. Adele told the guy that she couldn't marry him. Reagan then suggested that Adele have an abortion. The girl yelled at the guy not to dare to say such a simple thing as, "There is a baby's life at stake." The Baron began to ask the girl about the Bentley. Adele answered no. Then Daniel began to ask who the father was. The girl began to say that the father was a court musician. Reagan got up from his chair and immediately grabbed the girl, asking his name. Adele was uncomfortable and hurt by this. The girl was begging for the guy to let her go, but the guy still couldn't budge. Reagan yelled at the girl to tell her what his name was. The girl replied to Reagan that his name was Hector Avery. Reagan let the girl go and began to smile slyly. The guy wondered what they had going on here. The girl looked at the guy and told him that he had hurt her. The guy decided that it seemed Adele's sadism went beyond mere insults. The girl had already failed in her attempt to gain an advantage from a man with a questionable past. Reagan became an elder to the girl about how this man managed to seduce the girl. Since Adele is an aristocrat and a girl cannot be the first to approach a commoner. A month earlier, Reagan and Spencer's wedding. Bentley stood off to the side and chatted with the girls. Adele saw it, and she didn't like it. She didn't understand how Bentley dared to smile at these girls. Adele realized that Bentley only dared to ignore her because they are at a public event, and in Roman wit, always kneel down to lick a girl's feet. Out of anger, Adele swung the door open and ran out. The girl was annoyed by everything. She didn't know how she could take away her pain, so she just walked around the manor. Adele saw a conductor walking towards her. Afterwards, he accidentally bumped into the girl. The guy asked Adele if she was okay. The girl angrily asked the guy what was wrong with him. Suddenly, the girl noticed many scars on the guy's face. Adele started to ask Hector what happened and what it was. The girl touched the guy gently and wondered what made the guy like that. Hector started to look at the girl. Reagan realized that he wasn't seducing her. The guy started to tell Daniel that he was using his card, and after the guy opened the closet and asked him if that's where he kept the drugs, Baron started yelling at the guy that it was his stash and he was saving it for himself. Reagan liked all these situations as it was quite entertaining. Sometime later toward morning, Reagan was getting out of the carriage. Inga ran outside and asked Henson what was going on and whose carriage it was. The servant began to say that it was the carriage of Baron Daniel Byron. He was a friend of the young gentleman. Henson was telling the girl that the guy seemed to have had too much drugs and liquor. Time passed. Reagan was lying in bed, and the girl was sitting next to him. After a while, the guy grabbed the girl's hand and opened his eyes. Reagan started to hold back from Inga where he was. Inga began to rejoice that Reagan had finally come to his senses. The girl was telling the boy that he had missed lunch. Inga didn't understand why the guy's face shrank like that, and afterward the girl asked the guy if he wanted to eat something. Reagan saw that everything was right, and it was Ingrid, his wife, a good-natured wife, an asset to the whole nation, and the wife of the most despicable man in the world. The guy stood up and hugged the girl. Inga asked Reagan about something bad happening while he was away. Reagan asked the girl if she was going somewhere. Inga replied that she was going to take a bath. Reagan tells the girl to make sure they do that. Inga tried to say something, but the guy once again asked the girl if they would do it. After a while, Inga was lying next to the guy. Reagan got up, put on his robe, took a cigarette and smoked. Inga began to tell the guy about not joking about his health, since he was drunk not long ago. Reagan replied to the girl that he was sad, and afterward asked Inga about how she couldn't forgive him for this little weakness. The guy was talking about something to see what he was about to show her. Reagan had a smoke and was making circles out of the vapor. Inga was very much surprised by this. The girl asked the guy how he did it, and after Inga began to tell the boy that he was like a child at times. The guy smiled and didn't realize which one of them was still a child. Reagan started telling the girl that today he found out that one of the girls he knew got into trouble. Inga didn't understand what all this trouble was about. Reagan began to say that she was well known in high society as a gentle and prudent lady. But on the day of their wedding, the girl seduced a court musician and slept with him. The guy started talking about how it now appeared that she had carried. Reagan talked about how he knew her family well, and the guy imagined how horrified her parents would be. Reagan started to pretend he was thinking what the musician's name was. The guy was telling the girl that he was pretty famous. And afterward, Reagan answered the girl that it was Hector Avery. Inga got tired and went up to the guy. The girl took a cigarette and asked the guy how he felt when he smoked them. Reagan started to tell Inga that this is not a regular cigarette, and it is full of valium. The guy was telling the girl to try it. Inga started asking the guy if he would do what Inga asked him to do if the girl smoked the cigarette. The guy didn't understand what the girl wanted from him, but for his own safety, he took the cigarette from Inga. Reagan was curious as to how the girl would choke and drool after using the drug. The guy started talking about what he wanted to know first while the girl was sober. Inga asked the guy what he wanted her to tell. Reagan started asking the girl to tell about her first love. The girl smiled and looked at the guy. Reagan realized it was an expression the girl always makes, something else hiding behind it. Most people around him shun such connections, since Reagan is the illegitimate son of a king, a power-mad drug addict. It's a lot easier for everyone to avoid a guy than it is to come face to face, and the members of the Farnese family are no exception. Reagan knew that. That's why he kept trampling them into the dirt, even though they were already at Reagan's feet. Then, so they wouldn't dare belittle the guy, Reagan made sure their eyes, addressing Reagan, looked on with fear. But the guy seems to be completely oblivious to the fact that Inga is still Farnese, and this girl is one of those girls who shuns the guy and looks down on him. Reagan had forgotten the fact that the girl's smile didn't carry a shadow of sincerity. After a while, Reagan stood up. Inga started calling and asking what happened. The guy answered her that everything was normal, and he just lost interest in the question. The girl asked why it happened so suddenly. Reagan began to reply to the girl that it was enough to go outside the mansion to find a woman who would show more interest in her person. The guy didn't see the point of wasting time in the company of an emotionless statue like Inga. The girl stared at the guy, and afterward, Inga started telling Reagan that not once since their wedding had a guy kissed a girl. Inga asked the guy if he would kiss her. Inga took a cigarette and took a drag. Reagan started asking the girl what she was doing. Inga looked at the guy, and afterward talked about how she had some kind of stupefying feeling in her head right now. The girl started talking about how now that she had done this, Reagan should grant her wish. The girl walked up to the guy and told him to kiss her. The guy realized that he was the only one who always bends down and kneels before the girl. After a while, Reagan kissed Inga. Night came on. The guy was sitting on the bed, and Inga was lying on his knees. Reagan started telling the girl that he was planning to organize a banquet next month. Inga didn't understand what kind of banquet it would be. Reagan was telling the girl that it was problematic for him to do these kinds of events alone, and now he had a lady in the house who could take care of it. Reagan told Inga that he would like to help the girl who dug her own grave with her own hands. The boy talked about how he thought about asking the king for court musicians, but Reagan decided it would be better if Inga did it. Reagan talked about how his father was completely fascinated by the girl. Inga looked down at the floor and said nothing. The guy started asking the girl what was wrong and if she was okay with it. The girl smiled and said that of course she didn't mind, as this orchestra was amazing at their wedding. Inga talked about how she would love to see them at the banquet and hear them play again. Reagan smiled and told the girl that he would leave the matter on her. Afterward, the girl left the room and saw Lord Jochen. Inga started to ask the guy when he arrived. The Lord smiled at the girl and asked her about going somewhere. The girl talked about how she was thinking of visiting her father's estate before going to the palace. The Lord began to ask the girl if he could accompany her. After a while, the girl sat with the guy in the carriage. Inga listened to the Lord's stories and felt delight from his stories alone. The guy told the girl that as soon as Eisen returned, he would take care of everything instead of his brother. Lord thought about Reagan being a very busy man. Inga decided that she should invite Mr. Eisen and greet him properly. Lord was pleased to realize that there was a hospitable lady in the Spencer house who had become a hostess and a member of their family. The Lord talked about how his brother's ex-wives were deplorable, especially Madame Estra, his wife. She kept stealing jewelry from the family vault to sell. The Lord spoke of how she destroyed a great deal of linen in fits of drunken madness. A guy should only remember how fiercely she cut the strings of Reagan's precious piano. Lord talked about the fact that, of course, her brother and himself is far from a saint, and yet this woman was simply incredible. Inga sat there and realized that she didn't know that. The guy started telling the girl to forgive her, as the Lord didn't want to upset the girl with such gloomy talk. Inga told the girl not to worry about it, as the girl was always happy to learn something new. The Lord talked about how his brother could be quite arrogant at times. When he's in that frame of mind, he's capable of a fair amount of bloodshed. The Lord said to let the boy know if that was happening, and then he would be sure to have a talk with him. Inga told him that she had no idea he was such a brave man. After a while, the girl and the Lord arrived. Everyone stood outside and waited for Inga. The girl, with all her might, began to hug Andit. The brother was saying welcome to the girl and touched her cheek. After a while, Edwin came up to the girl and was telling the girl that she looked better than expected. Inga asked her brother why he was still at home. Suddenly, the girl saw her mother and ran up to her. The mother began to tell the girl welcome. Inga started asking the mother where the father was. The mother said that he was in the palace. The girl talked about her old heading there, and Inga hoped they could see each other. Mother started asking Inga about where Lord Jochen had gone. Endit began to tell the Lord that Elsa was giving him a tour of the mansion. The mother was telling Inga about how Lord Jochen seems to be a good man. The girl was telling her mother that he is, and everyone at a Spencer Manor is a wonderful person. Mother began to ask Inga what about Regan Spencer. Inga talked about how he was currently absent as the Duke was a very busy man. Edwin talked about how terrible he was. The girl told him to stop saying such words. The brother didn't understand how the girl was trying to defend him. The girl talked about how the Duke could be a bit temperamental at times, but the girl talked about how she hoped that those around him would be kinder to him. The girl talked about how she has a wonderful life and doesn't feel unhappy at all. The mother smiled and said nothing. After a while, the girl began to ask where Edith had gone, for after all, they had not gotten together for a long time. Edwin told the girl that he had gone to greet Princess Isabella's man. Inga was very much surprised by this. The girl was curious about whether Princess Isabella still harbored feelings for Nipu. Her brother didn't know if she was serious or not, as the girl was full of surprises. Inga talked about how if the girl was so eager to see Edith, she could just attend their wedding. The girl was telling the guy that she was very much saddened when her father didn't show up at her wedding. Edwin started talking about what he thought was for the best. Inga began to ask her brother if he knew that Regan was a great piano player. His brother didn't understand why he should care what he could and couldn't do. Inga asked her brother if he had ever heard him play in a place he frequented. The lad understood that the place he frequented was Roman Vita. The guy recalled that the girl had gone sneaking off alone one time. The brother asked the girl if she had lost her mind. The girl told her brother that she was in pain and needed to leave for the palace soon. Edwin and his sister argued. The girl asked him not to address her in that tone. Edwin shouted to the girl and told her about her acting very arrogant because she had become a duchess. After a while, the girl poked the guy in the eye with her fingers. Inga talked about how that was the only treatment he deserved by messing up her hair. The girl was telling her brother to stop acting like a child. The boy started asking the girl if she was really okay. The brother wanted a little more power for himself, but Inga laughed and told him to get up. Edwin was telling Inga that she should definitely tell him if Regan treated her badly. His brother promised to teach this idiot how to behave with his little sister. Inga was very much surprised by such an answer of her brother. Meanwhile, Edwin was telling the girl that he was not joking. Inga began to talk about what it must have been that she truly loved. It was the second time in a day that the girl heard such words. That made Inga happy. The guy didn't understand what the girl was talking about. Inga began to say that Lord Jochen had said something similar. The brother began to tell the girl that unlike some people, the Lord is a decent man. Evening began to come. Inga and the Lord began to go back. The boy began to ask the girl, "Did the visit to the palace go well or not?" The girl said that everything went well, thanks to the Lord. The girl suddenly thought about something. Inga wondered if Regan wanted to have a child. Hazen began to enter the office. The boy wondered why there were lights everywhere, for he was sure he had warned Henson that he would be back late because of an urgent matter. Hazen saw Regan sitting at the table. The partner started telling the guy about how he was really scared. Hazen began to ask the guy what he was doing here. Partner asked Regan why he was sitting in the dark. Hazen would tell the guy about being back, and Regan would tell him that he knows. Partner would be surprised that the guy isn't even drinking. Hazen would ask Regan about the fact that he was really working. Regan asked his partner not to remind him about the drinking since the guy was on the verge of insanity. On the table was a newspaper with Hector Avery on it. Hazen started asking the guy about whether this was the man they had seen last time at their wedding. The partner asked Regan what he was so interested in. The paper said that Endit Farnese had recommended him as a court musician. He was able to take over as conductor in just 2 years and has also taught for Lady Ingrid in the past. That's an outstanding resume for a commoner. Regan agreed with Hazen and talked about how he was an amazing person, so amazing that the guy would like to chew him up and spit him out. After her marriage, Lon Elvina withdrew from active participation in Soviet society. At this event, she would appear for the first time as the Duchess of Spencer. The news of the upcoming banquet at the Spencer house inevitably became a hot topic. The servant brought Inga letters from guests who were arriving because of urgent business. The girl told the servant to leave them here, 3 hours before the banquet. Inga asked everyone to double-check the ingredients and make sure everything was sufficient. The girl also asked to clean up the terrace and set the table. Inga said that some of the guests would stay overnight, so it was necessary to check that each room had a bell for the servants. The servant noticed that the girl was not feeling well. Inga held her head and said that she was fine. All the servants were worried about the girl's health and were happy to welcome such a wonderful lady into the house. They all told the girl to pay more attention to her health. One of the servants asked the girl to leave further preparations to him. Inga told the servant that she had to do it and it was her duty. The lad decided that it would be better to inform the master of the girl's indisposition. The girl appreciated Henson's concern, but told the lad that it was not necessary. And afterward, Inga decided that they had better attend to the terrace. Some time passed, and Reagan and the Baron came out to the ballpark. Daniel was praising the grand banquet. The Baron asked Reagan if he was sure he was okay, to which the guy told him he was fine. Reagan was disgusted with the Baron, because if Reagan didn't know Daniel, he'd think he was a drunk on a non-stop bender. A few days earlier, Club Romanvita. Baron was sitting in a chair and saw Bella come out of the room, cursing at the guy. Daniel asked Reagan what had happened. The boy replied to the Baron that girls no longer aroused him. Danielle began to wonder who Reagan was waiting for. After a while, Inge was told that the Royal Orchestra had arrived. The girl said she would meet them. Inga thanked the orchestra for traveling such a hard way. Hector was telling the girl that there was no need to greet them. Inga told the guy that she couldn't thank them properly for the great performance at her wedding. It bothered the girl, so she decided to greet the orchestra in person. Hector sat down on one knee and kissed Inga's hand. Reagan watched this and smiled. The Baron recognized the man as Hector Avery. Hector took the girl's hand away and began to tell Inga that they should prepare for the arrival of the guests, and then the orchestra began to leave. The girl called out to the Hector and asked him about the fact that even a greeting was unnecessary. The Hector said nothing, apologized to the girl, and left. Baron told Reagan that he admired the guy's desire to quit smoking, but Daniel wanted the guy to make an exception. Reagan started telling the guy to carry the shaft as it would be the best medicine. The banquet began. Adele and her father were thanking Reagan for such a banquet. The lad was telling the Count that he was honored. With that, Adele wanted to show his appreciation to Reagan's wife, so the Count was asking the lad where he could find the girl. Reagan said that Inga had gone away for a while, and the guy would relay the Count's words when she returned. The guy understood that Inga did not believe in the terrible deeds of Hector, but today at the banquet, Reagan decided to show the real nature of the guy. Suddenly, the guy noticed that another person was playing instead of the conductor. Reagan yelled and asked the Baron where Hector had gone. Henson came up to the boy and said something in Reagan's ear, and he started to leave the banquet for the upper floor. The Baron was surprised at this in Reagan's demeanor and face. The guy couldn't understand why Inga had gotten sick out of the blue. Reagan had seen the girl smiling perfectly healthy at Hector a couple hours ago, and the girl had even offered her hand for the guy to kiss her. Henson asked Reagan to calm down, but he told him to leave. Reagan walked into the room and told the girl to get up. Inga told the guy that she really wasn't up to it right now, but the guy was persistent, and Inga pestered from the bed. The guy started telling the girl that this banquet was being held to introduce the girl to the society. Reagan didn't understand why the girl decided to behave like this in society. The girl started asking the guy about his face and if he was okay. Reagan asked Inga about being forced to sit here by the Hector. The girl didn't understand who Reagan was talking about. The girl told the guy that she would feel better if she got some rest. Inga apologized for leaving Reagan alone. The guy started asking the girl where the commoner was. Inga told Reagan that she was sure he was in the banquet hall now. The guy didn't believe Inga and asked her where the commoner was. The girl told Reagan that it was okay if he decided to harass her. The guy asked Inga that this is what is called love between an aristocrat and a commoner. Inga apologized to the guy, but Reagan meanwhile started shouting and asking the girl why she was apologizing to him. The girl got out of bed and told him she would go down to the hall first. Out of anger, Reagan was breaking windows, candles. The guy didn't want to act like that, and he didn't understand why he was acting like that. In the banquet hall, everyone was talking, and it was all good. A Bentley came up to Adele's father and said hello to the Count. The father was happy to see Bentley. The Earl was telling the lad that he had heard that Bentley was a promising young knight. The lad talked about how he only came here for the dazzling beauty of Lady Adele. The lad apologized for being rude, but said that it was simply impossible for him to miss the opportunity to present himself to the Earl in person. The father joined the other guests, and the girl stayed where she was and agreed to give some time to Sir Bentley. The girl cried and left the boy. Bentley ran after the girl. The lad missed their meetings in Romanwit and could not understand what was going on with the girl. Suddenly, Adele took off her tuff and told Bentley to fetch it, calling the guy a dog. When Bentley went to get the shoe, Adele started telling him to take it and leave. The guy was telling Adele that she could trust him, and if something was bothering her, he was there for her. Those words meant nothing to Adele. The guy began to tell the girl that just like that, he could not let her go, and after Bentley offered the girl to marry him. Adele was shocked. Bentley knew that Adele's father liked him, and they got along great. The girl hugged the guy, and Bentley said it was no joke. A short time later, Adele cried out in tears to Bentley that she was pregnant. The girl wanted to die from how scared she was. The boy kissed the girl and told Adele that she wasn't changing at all. Lady Ingrid stood quietly in the hall. The Baron walked up to the girl and told her that she looked gorgeous today. Inga was happy to hear those words from the boy. Regan had told the girl a lot about the Baron. Daniel couldn't imagine what Inga had heard about him. The Baron asked the girl if she was okay, as Inga looked pale. Regan walked over to them and said his wife was fine and she wasn't such a frail woman. Baron didn't understand why Regan was looking worse and worse. Daniel showed the conductor that Regan was looking for. He was playing the piano. The guy was telling the Baron that his attention was on his spouse at the moment. Regan wanted to undress the girl here and now and run his tongue all over her body. Baron didn't understand what the guy was saying. Inga asked to let her go, as she thought that Regan was already drunk enough. The guy held the girl and said he was perfectly fine. Inga was too tired to deal with Regan. Inga noticed Hector Avery looking at her. The girl went up to him and told him that she liked him. The guy was a little shocked, but thanked her for treating him that way. Inga asked the guy to take it seriously. Hector told the girl that she shouldn't say something like that, especially to someone like her. The girl told the guy that she wanted to share her love with Hector every day. Inga asked him why he doesn't accept the girl's feelings. Hector touched the girl's hand too and asked what kind of crazy person can refuse Inga's love. But for all that, the guy still left the girl. After a while, Inga was approached by Regan and told her that the man had already planted his seed in another woman. Suddenly, the guy saw Adele with her father and Bentley. Regan pulled his wife and came over to them as GRA wanted to personally thank Inge. Suddenly, Regan started asking her father if she had sorted out all the affairs. The Count didn't understand what this was all about. Then, the guy started talking about how he wanted to know about the mistake. Adele immediately yelled to the guy and tried to set it up. The Count asked Regan what the bug was, and Adele asked the guy not to talk about it. The guy started talking about how the problem apparently hasn't been solved yet. Regan said he could help them, and then the guy ordered Hector Avery to be brought in. The guy said that the girl was old enough to get married, so Regan wanted to facilitate that. Adele regretted telling Regan about it. The Count yelled and asked the girl what was going on. Adele couldn't answer anything. The Count was telling the girl not to ignore him. Then Adele started apologizing and talking about having a baby. The Count was angry and shocked at the same time. Inga tried to get the guy out of the place, but Regan told the girl that he just wanted to help them. Earl yelled at the girl and asked, how dare she dishonor her family? Regan started talking about how he would introduce the person responsible for this. Regan wanted to show Hector, who almost walked over to them, but he didn't have time, as his hand was intercepted by Bentley. Knight was saying that Regan was now drug intoxicated on a day when a guy is expected to set an example as a member of aristocratic society. Regan couldn't understand how Bentley dared talk about him. After a while, Knight approached Adele's father. The guy started saying that he was the only one who deserved to be censured. Bentley said he couldn't control his impulses, for which he apologized. The Count asked the guy about what he meant that it was him. Bentley backed up what he said and said he should have confessed sooner, but he was too cowardly. The Count had no idea what was going on. Regan was angry too, and didn't understand why the man was interfering. Adele was crying, but Bentley hugged her and told her not to do it as it might reflect badly on their child. One of the aristocrats walked up to Adele's father and was surprised that his daughter was able to round up the Roboom coloring. Reagan was angry and told himself that Bentley wasn't going to get away with this. Reagan tried to get ready to go, but Inga fell behind him. Everyone screamed, and a Hector ran up to the girl. Reagan picked Inga up in his arms and told the Hector to get out. The guy ordered Henson to call a doctor. Reagan didn't understand what he had been doing all this time and why he hadn't kept an eye on Inga. Reagan immediately remembered how Prince Eldis had fallen the same way when he was a child. Reagan began to ask the doctor how the girl was doing. Sawyer replied that he told her to stay in bed and rest. The doctor didn't understand how it was fashionable to ignore her terrible condition and make her faint. Little Reagan asked Prince Eldis why he didn't say anything about being sick. His brother answered the boy that he didn't want Reagan to see him like that. Reagan looked at Inga and didn't realize what he had been doing all this time while the girl was suffering so much. People were standing in the street watching the carriage. They talked about it being Farnese's carriage. People thought it was empty, but Endit was in it with his father. The boy suggested they come inside since they were invited, but the father told his son it was fine. Endit asked his father if he missed Inga. The father talked about how he was just wondering how the girl was coping with the mess she had made. Endit talked to the father about how the last time the girl had come, she had looked quite healthy. The father unlocked the carriage and said he would go and ordered his son to stay here. Her father told Endit that he would stop by and just see how she was doing. Reagan was sitting by the girl's bed and heard Inga calling for a guy. The girl was asking Reagan what happened with the banquet. Reagan was telling the girl to forget about him and not to think about him. Inga tried to say that it was the guy's reputation, but Reagan wouldn't even listen to that. Inga started telling the guy that she understands why Reagan hates her. The girl was saying that she would try really hard and make up for everything to the guy. Reagan was telling the girl to keep her mouth shut as he already understood everything. The guy asked the girl if she needed anything. Reagan said that he would take care of the banquet, and afterward the guy told Inge that if she needed anything, she could tell Henson. Suddenly, the girl called out to Reagan one more time. Inga asked the guy one last time to let her talk to Hector. Reagan didn't know what to say to that. Father was walking through the banquet. Everyone was asking each other for their opinions on whether Ingrid was okay. Father was shocked by this, so he walked over to the girls who were whispering about it. The Duke asked them what they were talking about. Suddenly, Duke Farnese came up to Hector. The guy started telling him that they hadn't seen him in a long time. The father told the lad that he had made a good career for himself. The Duke thought that after that day, the lad left Elwyn, but he is here as a musician. After a while, the father punched Hector in the face with all his might. Duke tried to remove the guy with his cane, but was stopped by Reagan. The father started looking at the guy and calling him Reagan a Spencer. Reagan wasn't sure if Duke had the right to address him so informally. Reagan told his father that if the Hector had a face worse than before the previous beating, Reagan's going to be in trouble. After a while, the guy came out to the people and started telling them that this banquet had failed, so on that note, the guy had to say goodbye to everyone. The guy hoped that all the people could turn a blind eye to the mess of tonight. Reagan wasn't much good for these pompous gatherings. The boy began to tell the Duke that he had to go too. Reagan started telling Henson to wipe the blood off the musician's face and escort him to Ingrid. The father yelled to the lad that he would not allow him to do that. The kid started to look at his father. Reagan began to say that his spouse had requested to see him, so the guy gave his permission. The guy asked the father if he saw Reagan trying to daughter Farnese. The father grabbed the guy by the shirt and talked about it was in the guy's best interest to listen to what Duke Farnese had to say. The boy asks his father who he thinks he is and if he dares to point. The father talked about him warning Reagan not to let Hector date Inga. Duke was telling the guy not to complicate things if he doesn't know what's going on. Reagan began to smile and talk about how he was well aware of the story, and it didn't bother him. Reagan said that besides inviting the Royal Orchestra was his wish. Father didn't understand why they were doing that if everyone knew. Reagan tried his best and his father came in and ruined a great show. Guy ordered the Hector to be cleaned up. Reagan replied that he had made up his mind. The father got angry and asked Guy what he could possibly know about this story at all. Reagan laughed and said that what he wanted most right now was to wring Hector's neck. After a while, Inga had a Hector. The boy asked the girl why she had called him. Inga asked Hector if he was doing well. The girl was telling the guy that she had so much she wanted to say, but her mind was empty. Hector talked about how he was doing well now. Inga began to thank Hector, since it was only because of the guy that the girl got the title of White Doe. Hector told the girl that they always went different ways with her, so there was no need to look at the guy with pity. Inga answered that it was all in the past and the girl did not pity Hector. The girl apologized to the guy and told him that she thought she was mature enough. Hector realized that he was the only one who should ask for forgiveness. The girl said she was sorry and she loved the guy. The guy touched the girl's head and told her that she had really grown up, and as a teacher, he was incredibly proud of her. The guy was telling the girl that she had done enough and it was time to forgive herself. After a while, Hector came out to Farnace's father and told him that the girl was fine and she had a slight cold. The count was angry and asked him who asked him to do that. Hector didn't care how many times, he would beat him. The boy knew that his father's anger would not subside this way. Hector said that Lady Ingrid had grown up a lot. His father said that Ingrid was still a child and had married this madman because she was going through the rebellious phase of puberty. Hector admitted that he didn't know why he hadn't left Elvin either. When the guy was packing, he was anxious, as if he was losing something important, and it was today that the guy realized the reason. Hector had said that he could leave this place now. Hector was thinking of petitioning for resettlement in the southern regions of the kingdom. Guy thanked Duke Farnese for picking him up on the streets when he was starving and raising him. Guy said he would remember the Duke's generosity until the day he died. After a while, the lad began to walk away. Suddenly, his father pulled the boy aside and called out to him. The Duke of Farnese began to say that with his talent, he would not starve wherever he went. The Duke hoped that Hector would find a better life there. After a while, his father entered the carriage. Endit told him he had been delayed. Farnese's father asked Endit. He recommended Hector to the royal orchestra. The son asked for his father's forgiveness. The Duke spoke of how it was a heavy Bremen on his heart. Endit did not understand what had happened, and his father told him that they should go home as he was tired. Morning came. Daniel lay on the floor and didn't realize where he was. When Regan and Duke Farnese had gotten into an argument, Parquet had missed his chance to escape. Lamenting the missed opportunity, the boy drowned his sorrows in booze. And at the most opportune moment, a lovely lady passed by, and Daniel followed her with the intention of seducing her. Then the boy heard a loud noise and saw the broken piano. Baron asked Henson who had done it, as it was a very important piano. Regan was lying on a chair and didn't realize what had happened yesterday. The guy had a bad headache. Henson went over to the guy, and Regan asked him what was wrong. Guy asked Henson what about Ingrid. The servant replied that her fever had broken, but she still needed rest. So Henson took care of cleaning up the banquet hall himself. Regan asked Henson if he had sheltered him, but the servant replied no. Henson saw the lady leave that room at dawn. Regan had done a lot of things so badly that Henson wrote a letter of apology on Regan's behalf. The guy asked the servant if there was anything else he had done. Henson started talking about how, after the guy allowed Ingrid Hector to visit, Regan broke the piano. Guy couldn't believe he had allowed this man to visit Ingrid. Henson told Regan that he now needed to send a letter apologizing to Dom Farnese for yesterday's incident. Regan asked Henson if Hector had met privately with Ingrid. Henson was telling the kid that he had nothing to worry about. Regan smiled and told the guy that he wasn't even going to worry about her. Henson also told the guy that Inga had asked him to come see her when he woke up. Regan was telling the servant that if she needed to, she could come herself. Henson replied that she was still sick. Regan said she could go. Henson then decided that he would go, and despite the girl's well-being, he would call her here. Regan couldn't stand it and said she would go herself, and afterward asked Henson if he was satisfied. The doctor was telling Ing that her fever had gone down, and yet she shouldn't overexert herself just yet. Suddenly, the girl noticed the handkerchief she had given to Regan. The girl asked the maid where she got it from. Ella said it was in the hallway and she picked it up. The girl asked Ellie if she would mind if they swapped tents. The maid was afraid and said it wasn't even hers, so the girl could just take it. But Inga said she just wanted to give the girl something. Inga was telling Ellie that she could take anyone she liked. Reagan ran to the door, realizing that if he ran in, he would look like a dog that runs on command. The guy would start to lose his temper as soon as he thought about it. Reagan did the girl everything she asked. The guy didn't understand what else Inga wanted from him. Reagan opened the door and yelled to the girl, but suddenly, the guy noticed that the girl was sleeping. Reagan touched the girl's hair and didn't realize what he was thinking in such a situation. The maid brought the girl some medicine, but Reagan was telling her to leave. The maid told the guy that the girl should take the medicine by the clock. The girl left the medicine and walked away. Reagan started waking up Ingrid and telling her to take her medicine. The girl asked the guy when he got there. The guy gave the girl the medicine and told her to drink it. Reagan was telling Ingrid that since she was sick, Henson was doing all the work for her. Inga was telling the guy that she had just woken up and wasn't feeling very well. The girl asked the guy if he was worried about her. Reagan was telling the girl to think what you want, but to drink the medicine before it gets cold. The girl started telling the guy she had a question. The girl had heard that her father had come to the banquet, but Inga had never been able to see him. The guy told the girl that if she wanted to talk about the banquet, they would do it later. Inga asked the guy if everything was okay with her father. Reagan realized that the girl didn't know what had happened yesterday. The guy was telling Inga that he made sure he was taken care of, so there was no need to worry. Inga talked about how she thought the father wasn't coming at all. The girl hoped that her father and Hector hadn't met, and nothing had happened. Reagan tried to say something to the girl, but remained silent. The guy told the girl that they hadn't met each other. Inga told the guy that it was a relief. Reagan started asking the girl if she was done with the Hector business, and maybe he should do something else. Inga was telling Reagan that she should thank him. The girl thanked the guy for letting her meet the Hector. Inga spoke to Reagan about having the opportunity to talk to him and apologize for the first time in 2 years. It felt a little inappropriate to thank and apologize to someone who had let the situation go a long time ago. Inga was able to say a final goodbye, and now she felt much better. Reagan assumed that the girl liked him a lot. Inga answered the guy that she did, and she liked him a lot. The guy understood why the girl refused to become the queen of the Northus. And for all that, the girl even made up a ridiculous excuse that she didn't have the guts to leave Elwyn. Inga told the boy that she wasn't lying when she said she didn't want to leave Elwyn. Reagan didn't understand that. The girl said that she had suppressed her love for Hector a long time ago. And for all that, the girl didn't marry because of what happened in the past. Inga has talked about this before, but she wants to become Queen of Severus and condemn herself to a miserable life. It would mean resigning herself to the fact that the king is free to leave her at any time. Inga would end up the same way as the current queen, who was ill. The girl didn't understand why she should leave Elwyn, where she had everything, and live the worthless life that was forced upon her. Reagan asked the girl if she would put up all this show to remarry him. Inga answered the guy, no. The girl was telling Reagan that it was only because of the guy's help that the girl was able to avoid an unhappy future. If Inga knew how much pain she would cause Reagan, she wouldn't have done that. Reagan realized that the girl was not like him. Inga doesn't live in the past. Reagan was telling the girl that everything was fine and she should rest. Inga asked the guy how he knew about Hector. Reagan replied that Edwin Farnese told him. The guy was about to leave and the girl asked him where he was going to plan to sleep tonight. The girl was telling Reagan that if he didn't mind, he could come to their bedroom. Inga realized that it was probably uncomfortable to sleep in the study. Reagan began to say that he would think about it. Night was falling and the guy was still in his office. Henson asked Reagan what he was doing at this hour. The guy said he was writing a letter of apology. Henson smiled and told the guy that he had made the right decision. Something was definitely wrong. Either Reagan had lost his mind or the guy was surrounded by lunatics. Or maybe both. After a while, Reagan went to Inga's bed. One thing the boy knew for sure was that his assumption was more than just an assumption. Maybe Reagan was crazy to think about it, but despite the events that had happened, it wasn't that bad. The boy hugged the girl and fell asleep. Morning came. Edwin arrived at the estate to see Reagan, who began to call for a gentleman. In Edwin's possession was a letter that was addressed to Duke Farnese. Edwin was angry and said that this was not the problem at all. and in any case, it was not an issue that could be easily solved with a few words. Reagan asked Edwin how he could end it. His brother asked Reagan how dare he treat his father like that in front of his sister. Edwin talked about how if he treats his father like that, it is understandable how Reagan treats Inga. Reagan had no way of knowing why the guy was so angry. The guy was telling Edwin to just cut to the chase, since the look on Edwin's face didn't give the guy any pleasure. The brother was telling Reagan that he should have shown some respect and come to his father in person and apologize properly. Reagan wondered if Edwin understood who he was talking to. After a while, Inga came into the office. Her brother took her by the hand and told her that they could not stay here a minute longer. Inga did not understand what was going on. Reagan grabbed the girl's other hand. The kid asked Edwin if he realized he was out of line. Edwin yelled at Reagan to apologize to his father and get some manners. Edwin talked about how he wouldn't leave his sister here. Inga didn't understand what his brother was talking about. The brother was telling the girl that they had nothing more to discuss. Inga didn't understand what her brother was talking about and told him that this was her home. Edwin yelled to the girl and talked about how Reagan had insulted not only the father, but their entire family. Edwin talked about how the guy is doing this because he doesn't give Inga a damn. The girl began to ask the girl, since when did he start to care and worry about the family? Inga said that she did not quite understand what was going on here, so the girl asked to clarify the situation. After a while, the girl said that her husband had made a mistake in relation to Duke Farnese. Edwin didn't understand how anyone could call an insult a mistake. Inga asked her brother if Reagan had sent a letter of apology. Edwin replied to the girl that the letter had arrived late in the afternoon. The girl talked about the fact that her husband was tired that day, so he woke up late. Consequently, the letter was delivered late for that reason, not because Reagan was dismissive of the situation. Inga asked her brother if he realized this. Edwin didn't recognize his sister and talked about her being crazy. Reagan didn't understand what was going on either. The guy thought it was some new sophisticated way of maintaining brother-sister relations. Inga thought that it would be wrong to try to resolve the situation with such ridiculous arguments. The girl talked about the fact that she was ready to reimburse everything if the brother demanded compensation. Inga was telling Edwin that if he wanted a personal apology, she would go herself. The brother pointed at Reagan and talked about how he should be the one apologizing, not the girl. Inga told her brother that she was the one who threw the banquet, and she was responsible for everything that happened at the banquet. Reagan and Edwin were shocked. The girl talked about being Lady Spencer, and wasn't she enough? The girl asked her brother if he could elaborate on why she couldn't apologize. Reagan told them to stop. The boy said he would send another letter to Duke Farnese. Afterward, Reagan started telling Edwin to get out. After a while, the guy was in the room. Reagan was curious to know what was in the girl's head, and wasn't she supposed to be angry? The guy thought the girl might have ulterior motives. Reagan decided that he needed drugs. Suddenly, in a drawer, Reagan noticed a handkerchief. The guy didn't understand why it was there. After a while, Inga started asking the guy if he was angry. Reagan didn't understand what she was saying. The girl was asking the guy about what he didn't like that Inga interfered. Reagan started talking about how everyone at Valentine's knows he's a hopeless scumbag, and the guy was sure the girl was aware of that too. Inga started telling Reagan that he was amazing. The guy yelled and asked Inga why she always defends him. The girl didn't understand why Reagan was asking a question where the answer was obvious. Inga told the guy that they were husband and wife. Reagan was shocked by these words. Inga asked the guy why he was so surprised. The guy asked the girl if she had any idea how he treated Duke Farnese. Inga told Reagan that he was just mistaken. The girl knew that the guy was having a hard time that day. The girl knew that Reagan was not the kind of person from whom an apology could be easily obtained. Inga told the guy that, however, the next day, the guy sent a letter to his father. Reagan was telling the girl that it wasn't enough. Inga approached the guy and told him that she was his wife and she would always be on his side. Inga asked the boy if he would kiss her. Reagan felt relief mixed with arousal come over him. The guy thought he was really a bottom. Since Reagan was obsessed with one single woman, Guy wanted to make sure of that. Reagan desired Ingrid so much that it drove the guy crazy. The guy wanted Ingrid to be obsessed with him, since right now the girl was only fulfilling her marital vows as a model wife. Inga was glad that the guy was becoming more tender each time. Inga said that sometimes she still felt bad. Reagan answered that it was because she wasn't used to it yet. Inga asked the guy when she would get used to it. Reagan didn't know what to say to the girl and just turned away. Inga started to call out to the guy, but Reagan answered the girl that he was a little tired. Inga was telling the guy to rest while she did other things. Reagan took the girl and told her to stay with him. Inga asked the guy if she could ask a question. The guy told the girl no. Inga asked the guy if he didn't like kids. Reagan answered the girl about how he had no reason to love or hate them. Inga asked the boy if they should have a child. The last time Reagan was at the palace, His Majesty casually asked a similar question. The guy was afraid that having a child would become another responsibility for him. Inga was telling the guy that if he didn't want to answer, Reagan could do it later. The girl was telling the guy that they still had plenty of time. Night came. The guy woke up and noticed that Ingrid was not next to him. The guy noticed that the girl had disobeyed him since Reagan told her to stay with him. The boy knew the girl wasn't the type to obey blindly. Reagan looked at the handkerchief and realized that everything started with one rose and then it was only a sprout. Hazen sat with Reagan and thanked the guy for inviting him to the banquet. The guy asked him if he knew what happened. Hazen shows the paper and says he doesn't want to know. Partner asks Reagan why he declined the invitation this time. Reagan replied that they were already crossing the line. Earl Brighton, one of the biggest investors in their railroad business. Hazan noticed that last time Reagan had a lot of fun with the ladies invited. The partner asked the guy what he would do if Earl Brighton thought it was an insult. Reagan asked the guy about who would want to spend time with a bunch of hookers. Guy had told Hazan to schedule all business meetings for lunchtime from now on. The partner didn't understand where his master had gone. The partner told the guy that he wasn't kidding, and if the Earl of Brighton changed his mind, it would cause trouble for their business. Reagan told Hazen that he would just pay Shadi a visit, and that would be enough. The partner smiled and talked about how it was one of those decisions that her master would never make voluntarily. Guy told Hazen to clear his schedule for next week. The partner said he didn't have much time. Reagan replied that his wife wanted to invite Hazan to visit them. The guy asked Reagan what day would be best for him to visit next week. After a while, the guy returned to the estate. Reagan began to tell Henson that he would be leaving again. Henson asked the boy about what plans he had. The servant remembered that it was the day of the night's entertainment at Romanwitz. After a while, the guy started telling Reagan that he had gotten a letter from the Farnese house. Reagan thought it might be a reply to the second letter of apology. Guy picked up a letter that said, Duke Farnese would never accept an apology from members of House of Spencer. Reagan asked Henson if Ingrid knew about it. The servant said that the girl had read the letter, but had not reacted in any way. Reagan began to ask where Ingrid was now. Henson replied that the girl was now in the parlor with a friend from the Delgard house. After a while, the guy approached the girls. Kayla greeted Reagan and said that she was very happy to see him. Inga replied that this was her friend Kayla and her son. The girl said that Kayla couldn't attend their banquet, so she would stay with them for 5 days. Inga asked the guy if that was acceptable. Reagan didn't understand how it could be acceptable if the girl took her son, who cried all the time. Reagan hated that kind of thing. The guy realized that as long as Kayla was here, he wouldn't be able to sleep with Inga. The girl asked Guy if he was tired after the long drive. Reagan didn't look good. Reagan told the girl that he would take care of everything and she had nothing to worry about. The guy asked back and found out that they would be staying for 5 days. Reagan smiled and told Kayla that he hoped they had a good time. The girl asked the guy if he wanted to have dinner with them. Reagan replied to Inga that he still had things to do. The guy told the girl to enjoy their time together. Kayla asked the girl if she really liked it here. Inga didn't understand the girl's question. Kayla began to tell Inga that the guy was exactly as the rumors described. Inga told the guy that those were just rumors and that Reagan was actually very kind. Kayla didn't understand why Inga felt that way. The girl asked Inga if she really loved him. The girl looked down at the floor and tried to say something, but Inga was interrupted by her son's crying. Kayla didn't understand what had gotten into him. Inga asked Kayla if she could support him. Kayla was only too happy to do so. As soon as the girl took the baby in her arms, he started laughing. Kayla didn't understand what Inga had done and it was obvious that this baby could recognize a beautiful woman at a glance. Inga was telling Kayla how wonderful her baby boy was. Reagan knew that eventually Adele and Bentley would be together. The guy knew that Adele always acted so arrogant and bossy, yet she still stayed with Bentley. Rumors reached Reagan that the child in her womb was not from the boyfriend at all. An evening at Roman Witt's nightclub. Baron greeted Reagan with a smile. Suddenly, Liza, the daughter of the Minister of Defense, approached Daniel. The Baron was apologizing to the girl for something, but Lisa was asking if the apology would be enough. The girl asked the guy who he thought he was. Baron didn't understand why the girl was yelling since the guy had just hit the girl with his shoulder. Daniel was telling Lisa that he apologized, and also the guy started telling the girl to watch her manners when she gets drunk. Lisa yelled at the guy and told him that he was going with her. The guy begged Reagan to save him, but Reagan smiled and said goodbye to Baron. After a while, the guy was harassed by Belle. Parquet asked her if it was time for her to stop this dirty harassment. Belle was asking Reagan about the fact that didn't he come here to enjoy this dirty harassment? Reagan grabbed the girl's hand. Belle began to ask the guy about the fact that he was now making a saint of himself and had hit rock bottom. Reagan answered the girl that that was right, and he had hit rock bottom. The guy didn't wish the girl to hear this from a man who was in the same place. Reagan was telling Belle that it was disgusting. Belle didn't understand why Reagan started to think he was better than others when he got involved with Ingrid. Guy asked the girl to show more respect when she talked about the Duchess of Spencer. The girl was telling Reagan that she wasn't just going to let it go. Reagan was telling the girl to give it a try. Belle didn't understand what the guy was trying to tell her. Reagan was telling Belle that if she didn't like sitting back, she should take action and do something about it. The guy was telling the girl to remember that he had already hit rock bottom, and the guy doubted that another hole in their endless streak would change anything. The girl was yelling at the guy that she wasn't done yet. Reagan was telling Belle not to be stupid, as the guy never singled out the girl from the others crawling around in there. Just because they're both on the bottom doesn't wish them equal. What Reagan was referring to was the fact that their fathers are of completely different status. With all anger, the girl ran at the guy, but suddenly, Shadi Zenith, who was the chairman of the nightclub, took the girl's hand and told her to leave. Shadi was telling Reagan that this was his business too, and if he wanted to have a good time, he should show some respect. Reagan was telling Shadi that he said fine, but Reagan isn't here tonight for fun. The guy was telling the man that he has business to attend to. Shadi was telling Reagan to discuss business elsewhere. After a while, they left. Shadi Zinat is the founder of the Roman Vidi nightclub. He's also a well-mannered man who isn't interested in alcohol or women. Reagan realized that being in a bad mood, Shadi Zenoth was worse than Farnese. To Reagan, this was a man he hated, but to drum up interest from Brighton, their biggest investor, the guy will need the influence of House Zenith, which is controlled by an alliance of nobles from that region. So Reagan has to do anything to gain Shadi's favor. Reagan wanted to offer him a drink, but the man said he doesn't drink. Reagan offered him a drink since there is no need to live a boring life. Shadi asked Reagan if he thought his life was gratifying. That's what Reagan despised most about him. The guy began to tell Shadi that he had a request for him. The man began to tell the guy that, on the other hand, the life of a man married to an elven doe was unlikely to be boring. Reagan asked Shadi not to push it since he wasn't here for an argument. The guy said he wanted to talk business. Shadi Zenith started asking Reagan how much he knows about Elvin's doe. The man asked Reagan if he knew what she liked. The guy didn't understand what Shadi wanted from him. The man talked to Reagan about the girl's keen interest in art and literature. Shadi asked Reagan if he knew that the girl was particularly fond of Wilder's Withers Wilder books. Reagan didn't understand what the man was even talking about. Shadi couldn't believe that someone like the guy was able to appropriate Elvin's doe. Reagan replied to the man that he didn't know there was a stalker lurking behind that image of a gentleman. Shadi asked the guy about the fact that didn't he know that. After a while, morning came. Reagan woke up on the stairs. The guy couldn't understand what had happened. Baron was lying in Lisa's arms. Reagan realized that it seemed someone was busy. Shadi knows a surprising amount about Ingrid. For example, the compositions the girl often performed in front of audiences which authors and writing style she favored. Reagan told the man to stop talking about his wife. Shadi started talking about how he's sure Reagan has no idea how many people haven't given up on Lady Ingrid, and all because a girl picked a guy. Reagan was asking the man why he should discuss his wife with him. The guy asks Shadi if he's crazy, but the man replies that he's perfectly sane. Reagan decided that now would be a good time to cut to the chase and talk about his business. But Shadi interrupted him again, asking the boy if he knew Count Alphonse. Shadi replied that he had no interest in literature and attended all the poetry readings just to see Inga. Shadi replied that even Jacob dared to dream about her. Guy realized that he had to calm down because if Reagan couldn't get his support, Guy's railroad business could seriously suffer. Reagan began to ask Shadi about King Severus. The man replied to Reagan about how his brother, Prince Eldis, was also very fond of Ingrid. Reagan was sure that Hazan had said something about sympathizing with Ingrid. Shadi grinned and asked for another glass to be poured for him. Reagan tried to get him drunk and sway him toward his business proposition, but eventually the guy got angry and got drunk himself. As time passed, Reagan was sitting on the stairs. Shadi Zenat came down to him and apologized that he might have said something inappropriate the previous night. The man was telling Reagan that they were not close enough to discuss such personal topics. Reagan was glad the man realized that, as the guy was pretty uncomfortable. Shadi told the guy that he had always thought that Reagan was a terrible person, but for all that, the man was relieved thanks to the guy. Shadi replied that he didn't have anyone to talk to about it. The man began telling Reagan that he would fulfill any request Reagan made. Shadi asked him about how all he needed to do was take care of Earl Brighton. Reagan didn't understand what was wrong with this guy, and he that listened to him carefully. The guy realized that now he wouldn't have to worry about business. After a while, the boy arrived back at the estate. Reagan noticed Ingrid, who was playing with Kayla's baby. The boy tried to come in unnoticed, but Henson spotted him and told him that Hazen had been waiting for him since morning. Reagan replied to the servant as he headed straight to his office. Hazan was telling the guy that it was unbelievable. Reagan asked his partner what exactly he was talking about. Hazan admitted that he thought he was going to fail. The partner was sure that Reagan and Shadi were spell enemies or something. Reagan replied that when he had a goal, he would accomplish it by any means necessary. Hazen was surprised that the son of House Zenith had feelings for the girl. Reagan talked to his partner about how he was very much a stalker. Hazen asked the guy about whether that was enough to be considered one. The guy was asking Hazen if he was listening to what the guy was saying. Hazan admitted to a bit of a misunderstanding, as many are quite knowledgeable about Lady Ingrid. The Royal Weekly published an exclusive interview with Lady Ingrid. The young lady was born in the pompous city and is skilled in playing the piano, cello, violin, and other musical instruments. The girl's favorite author is Wilder's Wilders. Rumor has it that Inga has memorized one of his books completely. As for dancing, among others, Inga prefers the Viennese waltz. Reagan asked Heather about the fact that he was going to do the same. The boy didn't understand what was going on with Reagan. Hazan was responding to Reagan about how these are common knowledge facts that any admirer of the guy's spouse knows. Even commoners know about it. Hazan was asking the guy about how isn't it strange that the guy isn't familiar with the most basic information? Night had fallen. The guy was sitting in a chair and looking out the window. Inga entered the room and started asking the guy when he came back. Inga asked Reagan if he was done with his work. Reagan started asking the girl why she had to be born like that. Inga didn't understand what Reagan was talking about. The guy hugged the girl and told her it was okay. Reagan started asking Inga if she knew about Shadi Zenith. Inga said that she knew about the Zenith house. The girl asked that he was family. Reagan realized that he was making a big deal out of nothing. Reagan started touching the girl. Inga started telling the guy about showing Kayla around the city that she was really tired. Reagan didn't realize if the girl was really only tired. The guy got up and walked over to the window. A girl came up behind Reagan and asked him if he was angry. Reagan didn't look at the girl and said she wasn't angry at all. Morning came. Reagan began to look for the girl with his hand, thinking she was gone again, but she wasn't. The girl was lying next to Reagan and looking at him. The guy didn't understand why the girl was lying down, since invariably, Inga was always up by the time Reagan woke up. Inga smiled and said she was tired. After a while, Reagan reached up and kissed the girl. Inga started telling the guy that it was only morning, and afterward, the girl pulled the guy away. There was no way Reagan could understand why the girl refused again. Inga started telling the maid that they were awake. Ali began to say that Mistress Kayla was waiting for the girl. The girl started to say that she would be right down. Reagan tried to ask the girl something, but Inga started to tell the guy that they would talk about it later, and now she had to run. There was no way the guy could understand what the hell was going on. Reagan didn't understand why the girl kept pushing him away. From the other room, Kayla was yelling at her son to put the vase down as he might break it. Inga told the girl to leave her son alone, and he wouldn't break anything. Kayla replied to the girl that she was sorry because normally a guy doesn't act like that. The girl answered that one day her son had heard a piano concerto, and now he tried to play everything he could get his hands on. Inga began to ask Kayla about what the baby could play, since their piano was the great work of Master Arabin. Reagan listened to all this and didn't know how to react. Kayla started telling the girl to go and look at this instrument. After a while, the girl came out and noticed Reagan outside the door. Kayla immediately started saying hi to him. The guy started asking the girls where they were going. Inga started talking about how she wanted to play for the baby since he liked it. Reagan was telling the girl no and telling them to do something else. Inga didn't understand why the guy wouldn't let them do that. Reagan repeated and told the girl again to do something else. Inga started telling the guy that Kayla was next to her, so the girl was asking the guy. Reagan started telling the girl that if she was going to say something, it should be done in a way that made sense. Inga asked the guy about his decision to make a scandal because of what happened in the morning. The guy said that he wasn't going to make a scandal. Inga asked the guy why he was against it. Reagan replied to the girl that the piano wasn't there. Reagan started telling the girl that he got rid of it because the sound was terrible. Inga started telling the guy that even if it did sound terrible, they could have had a master come in. Reagan was telling the girl about how he wasn't worth that much to the master. Inga yelled and told the guy about Reagan's mother giving it to him as a gift. The guy started telling Inga about how his mother had long forgotten about the thing, and the girl should forget about it too. Kayla started talking about how she didn't need to play right now. The girl offered to go to El Farah as they had planned. Reagan asked the girl why they were going there. Inga started to ask the guy why he was asking for another ban. After a while, Inga told Kayla to go. Reagan had no way of knowing what the problem was. For a second, Reagan thought the girl had gotten another man. Reagan started asking Henson what El Farah was, and there was something going on there. Henson answered the guy that it was a store that was holding a literary event today. Since Duchess likes to read, Henson recommended the place to the girl. Reagan stood at the window and didn't understand why the hell he had broken that piano. The guy didn't understand why the girl was bothering with his mother's gift. Reagan figured the girl was just looking for an excuse to pick on him and then use that as leverage. The guy couldn't believe that the girl was the type of woman who would use absurd reasons to fight. Reagan didn't realize if he even knew anything about her. Henson noticed Reagan go into the study. The servant was very much surprised by this. The girls were standing outside laughing. Kayla told the girl about how wonderful it was. Inga agreed and told Kayla to do it more often. And afterward, the girl said that she should get ready to go home and Inga should get a good night's rest. Henson began to tell the girl, "Welcome back." Inga started telling the servant that she wanted to take a bath. After a while, Inga found Reagan in the study, asleep with a book on his face. The girl decided that perhaps she had been too harsh. Inga noticed that the author on the book was someone she loved. Suddenly, unintentionally, the girl dropped the book and Reagan woke up. Inga apologized to Reagan for waking her up and afterwards told him she was on her way out. Reagan took the girl's hand and told her to sit next to him. The guy was telling the girl about how her name sounded really funny. Inga started asking the guy what his nickname was. The girl went through a lot of names, but she didn't guess. Inga told the guy that she didn't know he liked to read. Reagan realized that there was no way the girl could know since she didn't like to read. Reagan told the girl that he knew Inga had a favorite author, Withers Wilder. Reagan asked Inga if she liked smart men. The girl got up from the guy and talked about the fact that she needed to take a bath. The guy had no way of understanding what was going on between them and why the girl was reacting this way. Reagan started asking the girl why she kept avoiding him. The guy asked the girl if she had fun with that boy while Reagan wasn't around. The book fell to the floor, and the girl got up from Reagan's lap. Inga started asking the guy how he even came up with something like that. The guy asked the girl why she was angry and if she felt any guilt. Inga started to say she'd had enough and refused to engage in dialogue while the guy was drunk. Reagan took the girl's hand and asked her about her daring to ignore him. Reagan asked the girl about how he is so insignificant in her eyes. The guy starts telling the girl about how he can play the piano too. Reagan shouted to the girl that he could be good at literature too, if he practiced it. Inga didn't know what the guy was talking about. Reagan asked the girl if she was bored with him. The guy was telling Inga that she had turned him into a lunatic, and because of that, he was addicted to drugs again. Inga cried and told the guy that she didn't want to talk to him right now. Henson saw the girl in tears and told her that her bath was ready and she could go take it. Reagan was picking up a book and a servant came up to him. Henson started telling the guy that if he continued this now, the girl would eventually hate him. The guy was talking about how even if the girl did something nasty, Henson was advised to remain lenient, at least for the rest of this week. Reagan didn't understand what Henson was talking about. The guy started talking about the Duchess getting too vulnerable during that period of the month. Reagan didn't understand what the period of a month had to do with it. Henson began to tell the boy that when he sobered up, he should apologize. The guy realized he didn't know anything about Ingrid. Night fell. The guy opened the door and walked into Ingrid's room. Reagan noticed that all he did was bring the girl to tears. The boy didn't realize if he had ever heard a girl cry so pitifully. Reagan tried to say something to the girl, but Ingrid wouldn't let him and got out of bed. The guy held the girl's hand and asked where she wanted to go. Inga asked to let her go, but Reagan told her to sit down. The girl started yelling at the guy to get off of her. Reagan started telling the girl that she was angry, and he understood that. Inga was still yelling at the guy to leave her alone for at least one day and leave her alone. Reagan was telling the girl that he made a mistake and was too rude. The guy asked the girl to stop crying because he goes crazy when he sees her like this. Inga was telling the guy that he didn't like her condition, so she was going to leave. The girl asks the guy why he is going to stop her. Reagan tells the girl that he doesn't want her to leave and he was wrong. The girl talked to the guy about how he never wanted this marriage, and the girl just forced him into it. So the girl talked about how she would take responsibility for everything, but that didn't mean the girl would let Reagan humiliate and abuse her for the rest of her days. Inga was talking about how the guy had spit those humiliating words at her without a second thought, and now it was all not her responsibility. The girl was giving the guy one last chance to back out, but the guy accepted the girl. Inga told Reagan that she didn't want to live like that. The girl couldn't fight with the guy forever. Inga told Reagan that she always lives in fear of future words and actions of the guy. Inga is scared to suddenly see the guy drunk or on drugs again. Reagan walked over to the girl and put his arm around her. The guy told the girl not to cry and not to wander around the mansion crying so the servants wouldn't think anything. Inga asked the guy since when did he care what people would say about the girl? Reagan told Inga that he cared since they were husband and wife. Inga started telling the guy that it wouldn't last long. The guy started telling the girl to repeat her words. Reagan didn't realize that the girl knew from the beginning that it wouldn't last long. The guy asked the girl about what she wanted to confess now, that she had been manipulating him all this time. Inga screamed and told the guy that he was the one who made her think that way. Reagan asks the girl what he did. The guy says he apologized, but even after that, Inga treats him like that. The girl was crying and telling Reagan about how he doesn't even want kids with her. Reagan told the girl not to make such a claim out of nothing. The guy asks the girl what she wants to say. Inga said that Reagan didn't want children, and that must mean that the guy was planning to divorce the girl, as he had done with all his previous wives. Reagan didn't understand what this woman had in mind for her. Reagan started telling Inga that it wasn't about him not wanting children from a girl. Reagan asked Inga why she would want kids with a man like him. The girl was asking the guy why he was saying that. The guy asked the girl what would happen if she gave him a life even crazier than Reagan. Inga asked Reagan what he could know about the identity of a child who had not yet been born. The girl started telling the guy about how he should have children too. Reagan talked about how he's just a bastard with titles and land he didn't earn, so no one cares that the guy doesn't have kids. Inga began to ask the guy about why he kept tormenting himself and refusing to recognize the fact that he was noble. After a while, the girl left. The morning came. Inga saw Kayla off and told her that next time, Inga would come to the girl. Inga was telling Kayla to be careful. Kayla started to tell the girl again that she only wishes for happiness. The girl doesn't care who Inga chooses, but if the girl is unhappy, she should stop it all and not let her die from the inside out. Inga thanked the girl and then left afterward. For the next few days after Kayla left, Reagan locked himself in his office and drank himself into oblivion. Every day, Henson had to put him to bed. Inga sat in her room sewing a new handkerchief with a rose on it. A servant came up to the girl and told her that dinner was served. Henson began to tell the girl about the gentleman locking himself in his office again. Inga talked about how she didn't care. Henson told the girl that she had an amazing talent for embroidering without a pattern. Inga answered the servant that she had already done such embroidery, and it was much more interesting to reconstruct from memory the location of each stitch. Henson asked the girl if the rose on the gentleman's handkerchief was hers. Inga smiled and realized that Henson had seen it before. Inga told the servant that the lad had thrown it away, but the girl had picked it up to ask Reagan later why he had done so. The girl was talking about something that Reagan seemed to have found and thrown away again. Henson began to tell the girl that he believed there had been a misunderstanding because the gentleman had not thrown the handkerchief away. Henson noticed the handkerchief on the guy's desk and decided to take it to wash it. Reagan asked Henson what he was doing. The guy asked the servant to give it to him. Reagan sniffed the handkerchief and told Henson it was his. Inga was surprised that the handkerchief was in Reagan's possession. The girl asked Henson if he had been looking after the girl's husband for a long time. The servant smiled and said that he had been serving for about 7 years. The guy talked about how there's nothing wrong with that and it's his job. Inga asked Henson what kind of man Reagan was. The servant started to talk about how he is sure the gentleman is always thinking about the girl. Inga began to ask the guy if he would give an honest answer if the girl asked about the previous Duchess of House of Spencer. Henson began to tell the girl about how that would be difficult. The guy was telling Inga about how there may not be any more out of here, but they all used to be the guy's mistresses. Inga was talking to the guy about how he was very trustworthy. Henson started talking about how the only thing is that the guy treats Inga with care despite his behavior with others. Inga was telling Henson about how Reagan can't stand her and everything he says isn't true. Henson started telling the girl that the gentleman has some gestures that only Henson is able to notice, since the guy has been working for him for 7 years. Henson talked about how it was hard to explain, but the guy definitely didn't hate the girl. Inga thanked the guy and afterward asked him where Reagan was. Little Reagan was telling my brother about Raymond being next in line to the throne anyway. The guy didn't understand why everyone was so fixated on pitting his brother and Raymond against each other. Reagan's brother talked about how that was the policy, and Reagan could tell everyone that he was on his brother's side, and that would be enough. Reagan talked about how he also likes Raymond. His brother told his brother that he wouldn't say anything because he was that kind of person, but his brother was sure that the king had something to say. Reagan asked his brother about how he couldn't just get along with everyone. Reagan always wondered how things would have turned out if he hadn't died. The boy didn't know if he would have lived a more dignified life than he did now or not. Perhaps Ingrid would have married his brother, and the girl would have been loved and respected much more than she was now. Reagan didn't understand since when he had been sucked into this quicksand. Reagan sat in his office and didn't realize if it was nighttime or not. Reagan looked at the book and realized that the author of this book was a man who had earned Ingrid's love with just words on paper. The guy didn't understand when he became so petty. After a while, the girl started knocking on the guy's door. Reagan realized he wasn't at his best right now. Inga walked in and decided that she needed to air the room. Afterward, the girl picked up the handkerchief and talked about how it was hers. Reagan asked the girl not to touch it since it was a guy's. Inga didn't understand why she should not give it back, since the guy himself threw it away and the girl picked it up. Reagan walked up to the girl and apologized again. Inga started to tell the guy that she had given it some thought And the girl doesn't mind if the baby goes to the father, and the girl will always be here to take care of him. The girl will tell the baby how much she loves the baby. The girl talked about how she would also make sure the child knew, as well as scary. Inga was telling the guy about how he was very handsome and beautiful. The guy started asking the guy about why she came. Inga told the guy that she came to make up with him today. Inga asked the boy if he wanted to look at his aunt's cabin. Reagan started telling everyone that it was very sudden. Reagan wanted to take the handkerchief, and the girl started telling him to take it then, since it was his. The guy was telling the girl not to do it, that she didn't know how to do it. Inga started asking the guy why he wouldn't buy it. The guy took the handkerchief from the girl and told her about Inga not being able to give something and then take it back. After a while, Reagan kissed the girl. In the kingdom of Valentine, the white fallow deer are honored every 2 years. According to the story, the king was so enchanted by the majesty of these beautiful animals that he named a festival in their honor. The government grants the title of doe only to the most beautiful women in the world, and the purpose of the holiday is to elect new beautiful does. In reality, the holiday is no different from an ordinary beauty contest. The event is also attended by guards, protectors of the beautiful women. About 150 young, good-looking, and unmarried men are selected for this honorary title. This year's Baron Guardian of the Doe, the guy thought maybe it was a gift from Lady Fortune. Reagan didn't understand why Daniel's ramblings sounded like a second-rate musical. The lad replied that at this rate, the Baron could perform. The guy started asking the guy why he stopped by. Baron asked Reagan why he stopped going to Roman Witty and if he had business problems. Reagan was telling the guy to worry about himself. Reagan didn't understand why Baron was asking, since the guy thought Baron didn't go either. Daniel began to tell the story and talk about how it was probably all because of Lisa. After a while, the Baron noticed the guy taking a cigar with a Casarina. Daniel started asking the guy where he put the Valum cigars and if it was even possible to get high with it. Reagan was telling the guy to shut up and get lost. Baron talked about this being his house and then asked Reagan why he came here unannounced. The guy said he was just passing through and would be leaving soon. Reagan asked Baron if anyone was falling for his flirting. Daniel started talking about how men like Reagan are always full of girls around him. Such men will never understand the experience of seducing women. Reagan asked the Baron about the fact that even quiet men fall for such things. Daniel talked to the guy about how he had already seen his charms in action. Baron asked the guy about wanting to seduce some quiet women. Suddenly, Daniel realized that Reagan wanted to seduce Lady Ingrid. Reagan told him to shut up, but the guy laughed and talked about how he was right. The Baron was amused that Reagan was asking for advice on how to seduce his own wife. Reagan brought his fist to Baron's face and told him to calm down. The guy said Reagan had a terrible temper. The boy began to tell Reagan that first of all, he should cool his ardor and never show his true nature. The Baron replied that besides that, there was another way to win her over: money. Daniel spoke of gifts. Baron was sure that Reagan had never given a woman anything before. After a while, the guy came back to the manor. Inga started telling the guy that she was glad because he came back early. Inga told Reagan that she was just thinking how nice it would be if the guy came back early. Reagan asked the girl why, to which Inga replied that Sir Jochen was already there. Reagan was telling Inga about seeing him a couple days ago, and they had a great chat. The guy was asking the girl why he was here. Inga started asking the guy if he and Jochen fought in Manhwa. Reagan was telling the girl no. The guy said he was a little tired right now, so meet him later. Come to think of it, Reagan had told Jochen that he would tie up Ingrid in Manhwa after the day of honoring the doe, but the lad and Inge had nothing to do at that celebration. Guy decided that maybe they should just go. But also Reagan knew that if they went and had to contact his mother. Henson began to call out to Mr. Reagan asked him what was the matter, and the guy replied that Baron Daniel was a guest of the guy. The Baron was chatting sweetly with Inga at the table. Reagan watched this and realized that Daniel really knows how to flirt with other people's wives. The guy started asking Daniel how he got the bruise. Baron started telling the guy that he had something going on and if he could stay the night. Reagan was telling the guy to get out. Baron was saying that his wife had already given permission. Inga told Reagan that Sir was very persuasive and insisted that he couldn't go home tonight. Baron was talking to Reagan about having an uninvited guest in his house. The guy couldn't tell that Lisa had barged in on him uninvited. Reagan figured it was more likely that Lisa had barged in on him uninvited. Reagan began to ask Jochen what he was doing here. Since Reagan thought they had already discussed everything, Jochen laughed and told the guy that he didn't want to say that it was forbidden to enter here. The guy replied that he had some business to attend to at the royal office, so the guy decided to stop by. The guy was also thinking about buying a gift for Astral before he leaves tomorrow. Jochen told everyone that Astrid was now his fiancée. Inga started telling the guy that she would be very happy to meet her, and it didn't matter what house she was from. Jochen smiled and talked about how Astrid wasn't actually from nobility and she was the daughter of a merchant who had a small business in Manhwa. The Baron was shocked at the fact that did Reagan's mother really accept a commoner into the family. Inga told the guy that if he decided to make a union for love, her status was not important at all. The girl was sure that Astrid was incredibly cute. Jochen replied that she was a beautiful girl, and soon the guy wanted to introduce her to everyone. Jochen replied that maybe the girl would be uncomfortable at the new stop. Inga began to tell Reagan that they would both be supporting Reagan's brother. The girl replied to the guy that she would go upstairs and he could have fun with the guests. The guy took the girl's hand and kissed her in front of everyone. Inga asked Reagan if she should wait for him, but the guy told her to go first. The guy started asking everyone about how they've never seen a married couple kiss. Jochen was telling Reagan about how the man across the hall is strikingly different from the brother the guy knows. Baron started asking Reagan why he should seduce his wife since they are doing well. Jochen questioned the guy about it. The brother started asking Reagan if he talks to her often. The guy talked about how they have nothing in common and nothing to talk about. The Baron was telling Reagan that he had a long talk with Lady Ingrid today. Reagan didn't understand what the Baron was trying to accomplish. Jochen began to tell Reagan that even if one does not share her hobbies and interests, the girl is a very good listener, and, besides, Inga is a good storyteller. The brother asked Reagan if he was sure he wasn't exaggerating anything. Reagan had no idea what the girl was thinking. Baron sat at the table and realized that Reagan really didn't realize how lucky he was. Jochen started telling Reagan to try to get something as a gift. Reagan asked his brother what she could have. Jochen replied for Reagan to think of something she might like. After a while, Reagan would send to the store. He had an uncomfortable hat on his head, but it helped the guy hide. The guy noticed that the Baron and his brother were both talking about gifts, and that meant really making an effect. Reagan wondered what she could get her. The guy decided to give the girl money first, but then Reagan thought about how rich the Farnese's house was. It made no sense. Reagan remembered that girls like flowers, but for all that, their garden is already full of flowers. You have to know a book to buy it. Reagan didn't understand why he was even thinking about it. Sometime later, Henson arrived at the lad's carriage. The guy was responding to Reagan that this was very unusual. Reagan was telling Henson to follow him. The guy asked Henson if he remembered what the piano that Reagan's mother gave him looked like. Henson told the guy that he remembered, and also the servant replied that the instrument was unique, as it was made by Master Arabin at his personal request. Suddenly, the guy was noticed by a customer. The salesman started asking Reagan what brought him to this humble store. The guy started telling the salesman to bring him the best piano, the price of which he didn't care about. Also, Reagan was telling the salesman to make sure the color was white. Inga sat in her room and wrote a letter. The girl remembered the words of Jochen, who had said that perhaps they would stay in Miloa for 6 months or so. Inga understood the fact that she had never yet left Elwyn for such a long time. The girl hoped that this letter to her family and friends would be enough to reassure them. Inga noticed that Reagan dressed carefully before leaving today, and the girl thought that maybe he had gone to another woman. Inga didn't know if the guy would come back intoxicated. The girl did not know if she was satisfied with being in such a relationship. After a while, a carriage appeared in the window. Inga did not realize that she was behind the carriage. The girl ran out to the guy and told him that she thought he wasn't going to spend the night at home. Reagan asked the girl why she was walking around in such folksy clothes. The girl talked about how she rushed to get dressed because she thought the guy would be with a guest. Reagan replied that he didn't have any guests with him. The guy tried to say something to the girl. Inga asked Reagan if something had happened and what was wrong. The guy replied to the girl that by dressing like that, Inga was seducing him. The girl tried to tell the guy that this was not the time. Reagan stepped away from the girl and told her himself that he knew it. After a while, Henson came up to the lad and told him that the preparations were completed. Inga asked the servant about the fact that they had a guest after all, but Henson told the girl that the master himself should tell everything. Reagan took the girl's hand and told her to follow him. In the huge hall stood a very beautiful piano. Inga began to ask the guy why he had brought home a piano so suddenly. Reagan asked the girl what would be the big deal about bringing home a new purchase. Inga asked the guy about what it meant for him to repent for what he had done. Reagan did not understand who was repenting here. The girl began to smile and told the guy thank you. Reagan wanted to win the girl's heart and look worthy in her eyes. The guy sat down at the piano. The girl asked him what he wanted to play. Reagan was responding to the girl that he thought the girl wanted to hear him play. The guy started talking about how he should warn her that he hadn't played in 3 years. The girl was very curious if the guy played better than herself. Inga asked the guy if he could play Gemmer Spring. The girl was talking about how it was spring and she wanted to listen to it. Reagan realized it was an easy piece. The guy was telling the girl that it was easy and afterwards started playing it. Inga started telling the guy about how she recognized that his playing was better. Reagan knew the girl was lying as he was faking it. The girl was telling the guy that sometimes it was very good to listen to this play. And afterwards, Inga started asking the guy if he would dance with her at the Lani festival. Reagan was telling the girl that dancing was not his thing. Inga told the guy that she was sorry as she wanted the guy to be her first partner. Reagan asked the girl why she should be in this performance when the girl is already called All Lanyu. The girl smiled and told the guy about how dancing is fun. Inga was telling the guy to keep playing and not to stop. It was the first time Reagan felt so fulfilled, playing for someone. The boy had never felt like this before. It was new to Reagan, so he wasn't sure what to call it. The boy decided that he could define it himself. Reagan decided that it must be love. The night came. The guy kissed the girl tenderly, and Inga told him that it was all great. Reagan asked the girl if she liked it. Inga told the guy that she was happy when he was so gentle with the girl, and she couldn't dream of more. Reagan started telling the girl that he thought Inga wished for more. The girl smiled and told the guy that it was a secret. Reagan started asking the girl what she would do if she ended up falling in love with the guy. Inga talked to the guy about how she would be sad if love developed between them. Reagan asked the girl about how she hated the thought of it so much. Inga said she doesn't hate it. It's just that love is a fleeting feeling. The girl replied to the guy that it is bound to go away one day. The guy answered the girl that it doesn't work for everyone. Inga asked the guy if he had a first love and if Reagan still loved that person. The guy smiled and realized in his head that that person was and will always be Inga. The guy realized that if he declared his love right now, Reagan would think he was crazy. Inga started telling the guy that if he ever fell in love with someone else, he shouldn't tell her that. Even if the guy said it, Inga would still stay with him, but it would probably hurt the girl. The guy decided that they should have a baby. Reagan realized that even if one day the girl hated the guy, they would have a child with the help of which the guy could tie the girl to him for a long time. After a while, Reagan sat in the office with the doctor. Sir wanted to say something about being young, but Reagan answered him to speak honestly. The boy had heard about the children of drug addicts having congenital ailments. Reagan asked the doctor if that was true, to which the doctor said yes. Sir asked Reagan what kind of drugs he was using. The doctor knew that some drugs could be eliminated and neutralized with medication. Reagan replied that he was still taking Valium and Casarina. The man replied that unfortunately, they don't know how to neutralize Valium yet. The doctor replied that the only way is to stop taking it. Reagan began to ask the doctor how long he should not take the Valium. The man replied that he should take it for at least 6 months. Reagan asked the doctor what about alcohol. The doctor began to tell Reagan that if you compare, alcohol has less of an effect, but with all that drinking will lead a guy to drugs. Sir was telling the guy to talk to his wife and discuss the guy's addiction before thinking about kids. Reagan asked the doctor not to say anything to Ingrid. Guy decided that he had to give up drugs completely. Dame Square, the first day of the Doe festivities. Baron saw Reagan in the crowd. Reagan realized that the guy was definitely enjoying it. Daniel looked at the guy and told him about going to the Doe Guard King this year. The Baron was telling Reagan that this year the beauties from the Northus were participating as well. The boy didn't understand what the Baron was talking about. Daniel answered the lad about what the latest news of the Sarantine Weekly had said about it. Ambassadors from the Northus had decided to pay a surprise visit during this festival. Reagan didn't realize what kind of ambassadors. The Baron figured the lad was worried about Ingrid, since she was almost becoming their king's wife. Reagan asked Daniel to shut up if he didn't want to visit the lantern on this lovely day. Baron told Reagan not to take it personally, as they are just ambassadors and he has nothing to worry about. Reagan didn't look at the guy and talked about how much it pissed him off. Meanwhile, Daniel was excited about the beauties of another country. The boy began to ask the guy where Lady Ingrid was now. Reagan started talking about the girl coming in the evening. After a while, Lisa approached the guy. Daniel was surprised that Lisa was sober. Meanwhile, Reagan stood apart from them and thought the Baron was right, as the king would not have come with the ambassadors. Endit stood at the feast and was approached by the princess. The girl was telling the boy that she never thought they would meet in a place like this. Endit was aware that the girl had been following him for some time now. The princess smiled and told the guy he was pretty narcissistic. The girl asked the guy if he could play along with her once. The princess replied that it was difficult for them to date outside of circumstances where royalty, nobles, and commoners were having fun. Endit asked the princess why he should go out with her. The girl smiled and told the guy that today she would be the guy's doe. The princess was telling the guy about having to serve her today. The Endite was telling the princess that he was refusing. The princess couldn't understand how the guy refused and disobeyed the royalty. Endit tells the girl that if it is the king's wish, he will escort the girl, but if not, the guy leaves. The girl tells the guy to stop playing hard to get. The princess was answering the guy about how she and her sister were starting to annoy her. Endit asks the girl what Ingrid has to do with her. Endit was asking the girl why she can't understand when she says he doesn't have feelings for the girl. The girl tells Endit that he better get a grip. The princess replied that she was an Isabella. Reagan didn't even look at the girl and told her that he knew it, and now with the girl's permission, he would go. Isabella yelled to Endita and talked about how she was giving him one last chance today. The princess was only asking the boy to be with her today. Endit walked without looking at her. The boy didn't understand how the girl was going to get married if she was fooling around all the time. The princess looked at Endit and told him he was a fool. The girl was talking about how she wasn't bluffing. Raymond stood next to Reagan and told him to smile since it was a celebration. Guy was responding to Reagan about how today would likely be the last Doe holiday for Isabella. Reagan was talking about how maybe his and Empire's relationship had soured so badly that they were sending Isabella away. The guy understood that he meant his wife. The boy began to tell Reagan not to jump to conclusions, since international relations did not depend on such trifles. Reagan wondered what Isabella herself thought about it. The girl began to tell the guy that he had the guts to ask the girl's opinion. Isabella smiled and told the guy that he had grown up. The girl could see that the boy was doing well. Isabella talked about what people say, no news is good news, and it's fair to say that about someone like the guy. Reagan asked Isabella if her decision was final. The girl began to talk about how after Severus they would evaluate the girl and recommend her to the king upon his return. Isabella started talking about how she is not Ingrid Farnese, so the king will be disappointed. Isabella talked about being hated by the man she likes. The girl had no desire to resist or run away. The boy looked at the girl and thought she was joking when she spoke of Endita Farnese. Isabella asked the guy if he was alone. Reagan was telling the girl yes. Isabella was telling the guy that it was a good thing because since the girl's mood was lousy, she could have snagged Reagan's wife a slap. Reagan didn't know what to say to that. Isabella told him not to be sad, since the festival was in full swing. After a while, everyone started yelling that Elvina the Doe had come to the festival. Ali asked Ingrid about her heading straight to the auditorium. The girl talked about how Reagan told her that he would be waiting there. Ali started telling the girl about how Inga seemed to be in a good mood today. The girl was smiling and telling the maid that she and Reagan have been doing well lately, and that makes the girl happy. Also, the girl is on a holiday. Out of the corner of his eye, Reagan noticed the girl. The guy started to ask one of the servants to go over to the girl and ask her to wait a bit. Inga didn't understand what was going on. Ellie started telling the girl that it would take some time, and if the girl was tired, they could go back inside. Inga smiled and believed that the guy would be here soon. A servant came up to Inge and said that Reagan and the princess had urgent business, and the lad told the girl to have fun and he would come up later. The princess brought the lad into the room and told him to drink wine. Reagan replied to the girl that he was not drinking now. Isabella started telling the guy that she knows about his addictions. The girl was telling the guy about how there are a lot more rumors reaching the royal family than the guy thinks. Isabella was telling the guy to have a drink, as it wouldn't hurt him. The guy took the wine, and afterward the girl started asking him what he thought. Reagan started to answer about the princess living a miserable life. The guy was asking the girl about whether drinking alcohol would lift her spirits. Reagan told the girl that she should enjoy the holiday. Isabella asked the guy how she could do that. The girl talked about how it was only because Ingrid Farnese turned down King Severus and married Reagan. Reagan replied to the girl that King Severus was a true connoisseur of the beautiful. The guy was sure that the girl was so beautiful that the king just couldn't ignore. After a while, Reagan got up and decided to leave, but the princess made him sit down, as she was not in the mood now. The princess was telling the guy that she could track down his wife and abuse her throughout the holiday. After a while, the guy sat down again. The girl realized that the rumors were true, since the girl had heard that he and Ingrid Farnese were now on good terms. The guy yelled to the girl that her last name was Spencer. Isabella began to tell Reagan that she should talk to Duchess Spencer. The boy held the girl's hand and asked her not to take it out on her. After a while, the princess began to be told that ambassadors from Severus had arrived. The girl began to tell Reagan that he would be accompanying her today. Reagan didn't know what he should do. After a while, a guy came up to Inga and asked the girl if she was unaccompanied today. The guy smiled and asked Inga where Duke Spencer was now. The girl smiled and told Inga that the guy would be here soon. Suddenly, Ellie ran up to the girl. The maid began to tell Ing that Reagan had said he was going to be late and told the girl to go back without her. Reagan was approached by Skellen Ors, who began to talk about how he could now see what Ingrid Farnese looked like in real life. Isabella looked at the guy and smiled. Meanwhile, Reagan realized that the girl was trying to inconvenience herself and the ambassadors from Severus. The boy asked the servant if he had told Ingrid to leave first. The servant said he had relayed the girl's message. The princess told the guy to concentrate on the banquet so he wouldn't be rude. Night was falling. The guy realized that he could barely contain himself, and here he was smoking again. Daniel and Lisa were having a nice time and dancing. Reagan was sure there were plenty of guys like Daniel at this party. Reagan realized that these men could have gotten to Ingrid while he wasn't around. One of the guys was sitting at the table, staring at Reagan. The guy had no way of knowing what was wrong with this guy or why he was staring like that. The guy figured he might have been another fan of Ingrid's. One of the guys covered the princess and told her about how she was going to leave with them anyway, so there was no point in bringing Reagan. Isabella started asking about where Reagan was. The guy asked the girl about how do you feel better after bullying a guy. The girl talked about how she would feel worse if she didn't bully at all. Princess realized that Reagan needed to instill a sense of responsibility. The guy was telling the girl not to get her hopes up too high for the guy, as Isabella might be disappointed in him. The princess smiled and realized that the guy had changed a bit. The guy was replying to the princess about being content to be condescending when it came to Reagan. Isabella told the boy that he was not the one to talk about it. After a while, Endit came to the girl. The princess's brother asked Endit if he could stay with her, as he was busy and had some business to attend to. Endit asked the girl to accompany him. The girl began to tell Endit that she was already fine, and if he wanted, the guy could go back and the girl would be escorted by the guards. Endit began to tell the girl that he should keep the princess company. Isabella told the guy that imposition is not his style, and besides, it's not very nice. the guy began to apologize to the girl. But Isabella did not understand why Farnese should apologize to her.